Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone who's present here, who has joined us today. And thank you for joining us. Of course, we're extremely grateful to you. I am Meher Gandhi, Public Relations Officer and Program Coordinator at All India Forum for English Students, Scholars, and Trainers. And on behalf of AIFEST, I heartily welcome all of you to this 3-day international virtual conference on mapping the shifting paradigms of postmodern society. Starting today, we are about to embark on this amazing journey, which is definitely an extensive and a necessary journey for the next 3 days. And I heartily welcome everyone who's joined us. We also have a lot of people on watching us on YouTube Live. So thank you to them as well. And just wanted to state that postmodernity, as we understand it, is about looking beyond the grand narratives, as the beyond is where the subjectivity lies. It challenges the normally understood rationales and reasons. And during these times that we are witnessing both locally and globally, it is important to question the narratives that we may have very conveniently consumed. And so in the 3 days that lie ahead of us, we all hope to leave the sessions and presentations with more questions than answers. With that, I would like to briefly inform you that in the next 72 hours, we are going to have the pleasure of listening to Dr. Sayan Dey, Abhilash Kaushik, Dr. Manu Mangatu, Shatrupa Mishra, Dr. Nilanjan Chakraborty, and Dr. Sujata Menon. We will also be having paper presentations, and I am sure that we are looking forward to it all eagerly. Today, we will be interacting with Dr. Sayan Dey and Abhilash Kaushik. Before we begin with the first session today, I would just like to inform the participants that we all are here to embrace questions and not fear them. So please feel free, and we welcome our Google Meet and YouTube audience to post their questions in the chat boxes while the sessions are going on. We will be taking up the questions and engaging in healthy discussions at the end of the speaker's talk. After the first speaker's session today, we will be having 2 fun and informative activities that are optional for everyone. We hope that you will be able to engage in these activities if possible. And I also request everyone to kindly remain on mute when the sessions are ongoing for the smooth functioning of the entire event. Let me now introduce everyone to Dr. Sayan Dey, currently a postdoctoral fellow at Wits Center for Diversity Studies, University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg in South Africa. Dr. Sayan Dey is a researcher and a historian. He is also the head of the Gender Equality Program at the Center for Regional Research and Sustainability Studies, CRRSS, India. So thank you so much, sir, for being with us today, and we wholeheartedly welcome you to this platform where so many people are eagerly waiting to listen to you. And I now invite Dr. Sayan Dey, who will be speaking on Guesthood, Mapping Affective Postmodernities, and I request him to kindly inaugurate this virtual conference. Sir, please.
Thank you so much, Meher, for this really warm and touching introduction. And thank you so much, AIFEST for extending this warm invitation to this really very important conversation that we are all looking forward to build together over the course of next 3 days. Obviously, as you all must have seen, my topic of presentation today is Guesthood, where I'm talking about how Guesthood function or has the capability to map affective postmodernities. Now, the obvious question that comes to the forefront is that why did I really choose this particular topic for this introductory lecture of mine? And we all know one thing, modernities, postmodernities, discourses centering on modernities and postmodernities are obviously not something which is very new to us. At certain points of time, especially if we are at the undergraduate and the postgraduate level, in some ways or the other, we are introduced to these terminologies of modernization, post-modernization, modernities, post-modernities. But what we really encounter is a lot of confusions while we, interact with these terms, a lot of ambiguities while we interact with these terms. And historically, culturally, socially, geographically, topographically, and in several other ways, we really find it very difficult at certain points of time, because there are so many overlaps as well, that how we distinguish between the term modernities and post-modernities. Now, today, through my lecture, what I'm really planning to do is that to seek your attention towards those aspects of post-modernities which are invisible, which are physically invisible to us. Because, what happens, we are somewhere in this very colonial / capitalistic setup of existence that we all live in. Somewhere, somewhat, we are all trapped within the narratives of post-modernities. Now, as at the beginning, Meher quite interestingly mentioned that post-modernities, amongst several things, makes an effort to look beyond the grand narratives. But the question remains the same: to what extent post-modernities have really been successful to look beyond the grand narratives of our existence, or to look beyond the grand narratives of knowledge production in a practical way? So usually, let us start with a very basic question. So what exactly happens when we think of the terms modernism and postmodernism, or what are some of those array of images that comes to our mind when we engage with these two terms? And especially, what happens when we're introduced to these terms within our classroom spaces, especially in a majority, if not all, in a majority of the universities in India. So we immediately, what happens, we immediately think of a set of, a Euro-North American-centric thinkers who are introduced to us through our syllabus structures, through our curriculums, through our examinations, through our classroom discussions. And then what happens is, in the due course of time, especially within the Indian higher education pedagogical structure, or to simplify, within the Indian higher education teaching and learning procedures, what happens? We are mostly introduced to the thinkers who are either directly from the Euro-North American-centric spaces, or those thinkers who might be settled or might be belonging originally to the global South. But what happens is, actually, their scholarships about postmodernism, about modernism, are being sanctioned by the colonial West. So now my point is, obviously, by mentioning this point, what I'm really not trying to propose that we should not read, scholars and thinkers who are based in Euro-North American-centric space. Obviously, I'm not saying that. I mean, there are no ethical, epistemological, or any form of ontological problems when we are reading them. But the problem lies when we are reading them as someone who is occupying an unquestionable pedestal of knowledge production. To simplify further, what I'm saying is the problem lies when we are reading them and worshipping them as intellectual celebrities. And that is what happens on a majority of the occasions, where often, within the classrooms, unfortunately, our teachers engage in such a kind of discourse that, okay, if you have not read this particular theorist for this particular ideology, you don't know anything. It happens with many. For instance, if you have not read Sayan, you don't know anything about Orientalism. Such kind of discourses are very problematic. And not just personally problematic that you feel you feel sad or you feel humiliated, but it is actually collectively problematic, because what happens in a way when you create such kind of discourses, when you indulge yourself in such kind of discourses, that if you have not read a certain kind of person, you don't know anything, what you do is you indulge in a form of violence and invisible violence. You remember at the beginning I said the invisibilities of postmodern violence. So you indulge in an invisible violence where you kind of create a problematic narrative that if you have to be regarded as someone who's knowledgeable about a particular subject, you must know a fixed set of scholars. Otherwise, you don't qualify to be a part of that narrative. So that becomes problematic in various ways. Now the question is why it is problematic? Because the moment you say that if you have not read this particular scholar, you don't know about postmodernism, if you have not read this particular scholar, you don't know about postcolonialism, and so on and so forth, you prevent the emergence and the evolution of the narratives that lies in the margins, that are very important, that are very crucial to be discussed, to be thought about, to be argued, to be accepted, to be criticized for whatever ways, but we need to put those narratives in our discussion. But we fail to do that because we are so much possessed and so much fetishized with a certain group of Euro-North American centric scholars that we fail to understand, or at one point of time we are schooled in this way to such an extent that we fail to believe, or we do not want to believe, that narratives outside these dominant Euro-North American structures can also exist. Now, when we start realizing that, what happens? We start realizing that two major issues come to the forefront. I mean, obviously there are many issues that comes to the forefront. The number one issue is that either we are too lazy to make a transformation. And again, let us go back into very practical spaces. Obviously, as I said, I'm not going to give you a dictation about modernist and postmodernist scholars. I'm going to try to take you into those invisible practical spaces of violence, the complex postmodern violence, and how does it act. So let us again go into a practical space where, and all this comes from my personal experience, to clarify from which positionality I am bringing forth these arguments and reflections. Now, this comes from my personal experience, that where you see that often what happens when you engage with discourses on postmodern scholars, or sometimes when you come up with theories or philosophers and their philosophies, those names which are very local, which are very important and very vibrant, but they do not match the so-called charisma of the Euro-North American centric scholars. At that time, what happens? You get two kinds of experiences. Either people totally reject you as something you are saying is rubbish, just because no one has talked about that so far. So it means that such a kind of scholarship doesn't exist. So, acknowledging and the celebration of what we call as the cancel culture. This is another poison of postmodernism, another toxic evolution of postmodernism, that is cancel culture. Because I have not heard something so far, because I have not known something so far, it means it doesn't exist. So if you are saying something important, I say, no, you are speaking rubbish. If you're not naming these particular people, if these particular names doesn't feature in your discourse, you don't know anything, you're speaking rubbish. That's the number two problem. You realize that it is problematic. We realize that there are issues when we indulge in such kind of hierarchical narratives of postmodernization. But then we are too lazy. We are too lazy to make a transformation. We just simply bypass it, or we simply indulge in a casual discourse that if things have not changed so far, who am I to change these things? or what it is going to do in my life. Why should I take so much of effort to change? But this kind of being, this kind of mindset is a mindset of bad faith, a bad faith that has many scholars have talked about at different points of time. We all know that. Where I believe that if it is not affecting me, it is not affecting anybody, but at some point of time, it is bound to affect me. I mean, it is impossible to escape from this trap. Somewhere, somewhat, whether I'll encounter the challenge while I teach in the classroom, whether I'll encounter the challenge maybe while I apply for a job, I'll encounter the challenge when I frame a syllabus structure, when I execute a syllabus structure, I'll encounter the challenge in the pedagogical space and in several other spaces, but I have to face that. So this trap in the bad faith is another problem that we often encounter with our own self. When we try to make a transformation, when we try to make this realization that post-modernity or post-modernization is an unquestionable entity. When we try to come out of this particular structure, we face these kind of challenges. Now, what happens is, now why I understand these as challenges, because these problematic mindsets about postmodernism not only affect us as researchers, as teachers, as scholars, as students. So my argument is, these challenges of postmodernism not only affects us within our respective academic and research disciplines, but it also moves beyond and invades our ways of thinking and doing in our personal life as well. And these reflections very much in our body languages, in our behavioral patterns, in our thinking patterns, in our daily life. And this is what actually, Sara Ahmed, in one of her very famous works, and the name of the article is Affective Economies. I am pretty sure many of you must have come across. If you have not, please go through it. If you look at that particular article, she comes up with a very interesting argument, and she says that when we are talking about, and she obviously says in the context of economies, and in that particular context, what she says is that that when we are talking about the state of finance, or when we are talking about the socio-political state of a country, what are our usual points of our focus? We focus on the financial structures, we talk about the political structures, we talk about the failures and the successes of political ideologies, political narratives. We talk about budgetary factors, etc. Now, in that process, which are obviously very important, we need to talk about those. But what is also problematic is our consistent ignorance about the personal and collective emotions and thought processes. When we talk about a particular socio-political state of a country, or when we just reflect about a country in general, maybe whatever factors we are engaging, how many of us talk about emotions? How many of us talk about our mindsets? How many of us engage in the discourse of thought processes? That is a very important question that she asks. And that is why she uses the terms affective. And similarly, I contextualize that particular notion of Sara Ahmed within this particular understanding of affective post-modernities. Now, this is where the invisible elements. Now, can we see a body language? Can we see a mindset? Can we see, a kind of thought process? We can't see that. But it is very much embedded within us. And also, what happens is, in our daily life, the way we act, the way we behave with each other, the way we share our thoughts with each other, the way we produce knowledge, both individually and collectively, are very much motivated, are very much influenced by the factors of what we refer to as the emotional, eternal, and the mindset factors. And this is a very crucial point that we should try to incorporate when we are reading postmodernities. Because today, for instance, and this is very much, these narratives of modernity and postmodernity, where you see emotions playing a pivotal role towards shaping our individual and collective mindset and approach towards our society around, is very much reflected, through our homes, through our neighborhoods, in our drawing rooms, in our kitchen spaces, in our plates, in our palettes, and in several other, visible and invisible spaces. Today, you will see, for the sake of, making transformations, any kind of transformation, you talk about a gender transformation, you can talk about political transformation, you can talk about financial transformation, you can take ample of examples around. For any kind of transformation, when people engage in such kind of discourses, immediately our target is to talk about that we need to have rules and regulations, we need to have policies, we need to have ethical norms, there should be proper legal implementations, etc. But still, in spite of initiating ample of legal implementations, in spite of indulging in ample of legal transformations, rules and regulations, laws and orders, duties, rights, etc., so many things have been done, can we see that transformation is visible? Can we see a major transformation in the crisis that we face in our country? You take example of any form of crisis. I'm not talking about any particular crisis. You take any form of crisis. Do you see a radical, visible transformation where we can confidently see that, yes, this particular right, this particular duty, this particular legal implementation has brought a drastic change? Obviously, changes have come. Changes have been in certain sectors. Changes have been really eye-opening, changes have been really very impactful, but there is a consistent lack of consistency, where you see that somewhat at the beginning, you see a lot of changes, but in the middle, somewhat, that consistency is lost. Why is it so? It is so because of our mindset. No matter how many different kinds of rules, regulations, laws, and order you bring into forth, to make your transformations, to make your changes, to question, you can organize mass protests, you can organize social media protests, lot of things can be done, lot of things can be impactful, but for a long-term permanent solution, what we need is the change in our mindsets, the way we look at our society. So it is important for us not to just engage with post-modernity as in singular loose term, but to engage with this perspective of affective postmodernities. And to justify my argument further, let me give you some very basic examples. For instance, how do we categorize ourselves that I am a very modern, I am a very postmodern person? How do we categorize ourselves in our daily life? I'm not going into all those theoretical jargons, what the theorists have said, etc., etc. You can find it by yourself. But let us look into the practical picture. Now, for instance, one common tendency is, what is our neighbor buying for his or her comfort at home? I'll peep into the neighbor's house, then I'll look into my own house, and then I'll do a comparative study. And then what I'll indulge in is, okay, if my neighbor has 2 televisions, I also need to have 2 TVs, without even thinking whether I require it or not. Now, my neighbor stays in a 3-room apartment. I also should get a 3-room apartment for myself. My neighbor have 2 air conditioners. I have 1 air conditioner. So I need to prove myself that I'm much more modernized and much more updated than my neighbor. So I need to have 3 air conditioners at my house. So you see, at the practical level, this is our mindset towards modernity, being a modern person. This is our mindset of questioning the ethics and the challenges of the past. Similarly, you also see another aspect which I often bring with respect to my examples of postmodernity, because something which I work and is close to my heart is culinary epistemology. So I also bring examples of a lot from the food. So nowadays you will see there is this tendency of having foods or purchasing foods from a particular restaurant. Now you may like the taste, you may not like the taste, but at least you can flaunt around and say that you have on a regular basis, you and your family members have food from this particular set of restaurants. Why? Because this gives you a kind of pseudo feeling of upgradation in a society, in a postmodern social structure. Because this very Eurocentric / capitalistic / colonial narratives of postmodernity falsely teaches us that, we need to indulge ourselves in this fake ways of qualifying ourselves as modern and postmodern, where we need to indulge in these capitalistic businesses, where we need to have food from a certain kind of restaurants, we need to wear dresses of a certain brand, we need to have a physical outlook in a certain pattern, we need to speak in a certain way, we need to pronounce our words in a certain manner, we need to smile in a certain manner, we need to have certain manner of hand movements, certain manner of walking patterns, keeps on. These are all the capitalistic traps of postmodernity. More and more you fall into these traps, more and more you are accepted into this fold of postmodernity. And as I say to you, because I personally work with the perspectives of decolonization in general, obviously across and over different sectors, different perspectives. So for me, these very narratives, these very perspectives of postmodernity are highly questionable. Now, my question again, let me again clarify. I always feel I need to do this clarification, that I'm not taking a particular side, and I'm not telling anybody that we should not indulge in all these kind of fantasies. We need to do, but we need to question our purpose, why we are doing it. We want to indulge in these perspectives because we really want to do it from the core of my heart, which is perfectly fine. But we want to indulge in these perspectives not because we want to do it personally, but because the society dictates us that if you have to gain a certain privilege and certain parameter in a postmodern society, you have to indulge in this, otherwise you don't exist. If it is a second part, then we need to question rather than falling blindly into that trap. Now the question is, despite knowing these things, I am sharing these things with you. I'm pretty much sure many of you face these tensions, face these encounters, face these confusions in your daily life. But the question is still how such parameters of thinking keeps on getting preserved. Now, that is the question. If we know, then what is wrong? I mean, what is going wrong? Why we just can't dismantle these parameters? And they have been so much socio-historically embedded within us. It just didn't happen yesterday. It has been within us, these kind of mindsets, these kind of attitudes, ethics, etiquettes, and parameters, these problematic parameters of postmodernity has been within our mind, within our existence, within our psyche for several centuries. How can it exist in such an unquestionable manner, in such an unquestionable pattern? Now, the first is, what happens? The way we talk about cultures, the way we look at postmodernity is altogether very problematic. And as I already said, that it is necessary for us to look into, when we try to understand the postmodern challenges, the first thing is we need to look into the very challenges in a collective way. Just that at that particular moment it is not affecting me, it doesn't mean that it is not my problem. It is my problem as well, because we in a society exist as a collective entity. We are not individual. I mean, physically we are individuals, but we are all interrelated to each other. We know that. We have read so many of theories and philosophies about it. So the first thing is we have to understand, we have to come out of this bad faith that it is not postmodernity. If a particular problem is not affecting me, If a theft in my neighborhood is not affecting me at that point of time because my house has not been robbed, my neighbor's house has been robbed, I can't sit with that idea because next day it might be my house which gets robbed. So, we have to always look at these postmodern phenomenon, the postmodern space, as a collective entity. Number two, our focus should be on these invisible aspects of postmodernity. That is, right from the point of our upbringing, our children, our next generation, our people around, right from the moment of upbringing, we have to keep these things in mind. You will see, it's a very common thing. We talk about violence, we talk about how to overcome violence, abuses, which are both physical, which are emotional, which are hipster, which are like hidden under jokes and loose comments, etc. How to overcome such kind of violence. We keep on talking about that. But at the same time, you'll also see when there is like children, they often indulge in violence, which are often acknowledged by their parents. Just with this idea, just with this fact that, they are kids, they are so innocent. They don't understand these things. Let them do whatever they want. Well, to a certain extent, in certain contexts, this is very problematic. Because sometimes as children, you will see, children hitting stones at dogs and animals. And often I have seen personally parents are giggling and laughing out. Why? Because, they are kids, they don't understand violence. It is, this is where you systematize violence. This is the point, this reaction makes the kid believe that, okay, I am hitting somebody, I am hurting somebody, somebody is squeaking and crying and running away. That is a great job I am doing. Later on, these kind of activities where the very seeds of violence is sown, and these kind of activities multiplies later to more problematic, violent attitudes. And at that time, we complain that these people have gone out of hand, but that has happened long time back. So from the very childhood days, from the very rooted times, it is important for us to really identify these hidden parameters of violence that are very systematically, structurally hiding under the narratives of innocence, under the narratives of jokes, under the narratives of casualty, etc., and point out right there. And you will see, for example, the way we dress, every day we are facing some kind of violence of the other. The way we dress, the way we talk, the way we think, the way we abuse, every day we are all, creating some kind of violence of the other on an everyday basis. And we are all doing that. Either we are doing it consciously, very consciously, maybe we are doing it unconsciously, but we are all doing that. For example, somebody might come and pass a comment about a hairstyle. Somebody might come and pass a comment about my dress. Somebody might come and pass a comment about my skin texture. Somebody might come and pass a comment about my height or my body shape. Every time we are doing, and we are doing it in such a systematic way, we are hiding it under a set of very attractive and seductive metaphors. For example, nowadays you will see, it actually makes me feel so sad and disgusted. In the social media, often it's a common thing to see that people, even without verifying facts, what has happened, what has not happened, simply feel like calling out names and abusing people. And then you will see 100, 150, 200, same category of problematic people with problematic mindset come and acknowledge that violence, likes with smileys, like, hearts, support, etc. And then by the time the truth comes out that the one whom we have abused and whom we have convicted is not responsible for a misdeed, that person's self-respect is gone. Now, if these kind of problematic approaches are countered, then postmodernity teaches us that we should hide it under the language of being bold, being outspoken. Now, obviously, we need to be bold, but we need to be outspoken. But what is necessary is being critical about our approach. Where is the criticality of the approach? Without verifying facts, without understanding anything, always in this tendency of cheap publicity, this tremendous greed, this tremendous seduction for cheap publicity, we often indulge in such kind of reckless approaches. I have often seen people abusing one another on the road, calling the crowd, getting them beaten just for nothing, just for a misunderstanding without even verifying the fact, because the person thinks that the person has done something really bold, something great, something, something heroic. So, post-modernity also, if I look at the negative, the dark sides of post-modernity, this arrogance of post-modernity needs to be questioned. And with the passage of time, you would see that we are becoming more and more arrogant. And this arrogance undergoes a form of, unquestionable celebration in every corner, which is becoming more alarming for us. Your arrogance is a boldness. Your arrogance is being outspoken. Your arrogance is being heroic. That is becoming so problematic. And these are where you see the invisible dimensions of postmodernity, which hardly gets noticed. Even if it gets noticed, people fail to question. People want to question, but they're afraid to question because they are on the side of the minorities. They're on the side of the statistical minority, and they're afraid that if we question, who knows, we can also be subject of abuse and humiliation. So you see, these are the problems, these are those invisibilities of post-modernity that we often fail to understand, fail to realize, and fail to counter. Now, to come to the very last part, the last segment of my reflections, with which I would stop, and then it would be nice to receive your questions or whatever, counter arguments. I propose the methodology of Guesthood. Now, we need to obviously try to challenge these very structures, these very problematic narratives of post-modernity through the methodology of Guesthood. Now, what is Guesthood? Now, this Guesthood actually tells us that we should have this mutual respect. We should try to create a space through our mindset, through our behavioral patterns, through our ways of seeing the world, a space of respect, a space of reciprocity, and a space for accountability, where we respect each other, where we respect each other's differences. It is necessary for us that not always we should look forward to indulge or try to create a space for consensus. Why everything has to be based on a consensus? We should also try to create for dissensus, where we acknowledge each other's differences, where we acknowledge each other's diversity, and even if we don't accept, we don't put ourselves, we don't push ourselves from the part of respecting each other. This notion of mutual self-respect should be a part of our habitual exercise in our existence. And Guesthood teaches us that. This very phenomenon of Guesthood tells us that obviously we have the right to embrace each other. We have the right to share our perspectives with each other. We have the right to share different knowledges, different dimensions, different ideologies with each other. But we shouldn't cross a borderline. There always has to be a borderline of respect. Just because I am your friend, it doesn't give me the right to body shame you, to pass loose comments on your skin color, or to crack a joke on your hairstyle. Just because I am your teacher, it doesn't give me the right to abuse you and humiliate you just because you don't know a certain group of theorists, certain group of philosophers. It doesn't give me the right to call out your name in the middle of the class and humiliate you, or even privately as well. Somewhere, somewhat, we should draw the borderline. And from where does this very notion of Guestroot comes? This very notion of Guestroot comes, it's an integral part of the indigenous Maori culture of New Zealand. And one of the scholars who has worked with the Maori community very closely, Graham Harvey, writes about this particular methodology of Guesthood, where he says that, you see, what happens in the Maori culture, if you enter into a Maori community, they will welcome you. But at the same time, through their activities, through their gestures, through their behavior, they will also let you know, they will also teach you certain basic elements of Maori culture. How to respect them, how to understand them, how to really, learn the values from them. Otherwise, we all have this tendency that we try to invade other cultural spaces and try to appropriate them in our own way. When we are not allowed to do that, we indulge and unleash violence. To prevent that, that is what Guesthood teaches us, that we all treat each other with mutual respect. We all treat each other with a form of reciprocity, but at the same time, we should not follow that borderline. And these negative perspectives, and what does a borderline teaches us? We often say in our daily conversation, please don't cross the borderline, or we should not cross the borderline. What does borderline teaches us? Borderline teaches us that somewhere, somewhat, I need to stop, the person in front of me need to stop and silently reflect on each other. If you're always in a state of communication, if you're always trying to invade each other, when do we get the time? When do we get that energy to really understand each other? So that borderline reminds us that somewhere we need to stop and ponder and introspect about each other's culture, each other's traditions, the positive sides, the negative sides, and that is how, a gradual possibility builds up to generate collective and co-creative existential spaces of caring and sharing, where knowledge is produced not as a hierarchical entity, but knowledge is produced as a way of developing spaces of care and share. So thank you so much once again, and I'll stop here, and it will be very nice to receive your questions, reflections, agreements, disagreements, whatever you wish to share. Thank you so much.
I hope I'm clearly visible and audible, sir.
Yes, you are audible.
Great. So we do have a lot of questions, and I just wanted to thank you once again, sir, for all the important points that you've had and you've talked about. And just to summarize a little bit, maybe I could, tell everyone that sir today talked about hierarchical narratives and how the emotions, how when we talk about nations and when we talk about global powers, we don't really look at look at emotions and mindsets, which is extremely important and something that needs to be focused upon. We also just focus on rules and regulations and policies in discussion rooms and in major organizations as well. That's the trend that's been followed, as highlighted. So I also talked about how the ways in which we conduct ourselves in our daily lives, the ways that we, the dressing styles, the trends that we follow really prove that we may have understood post-modernity, but may have not absorbed it. And so thank you, sir, for all of those comments and observations. You also talked about how necessary it is to be critical and not just outspoken, which I think can be taken as a life lesson, especially in these times when social media is such a huge platform for anybody to be anonymous while being outspoken. And thank you also for emphasizing on creating spaces for respect and not necessarily for consensus. And I mean, you definitely talked a lot about a lot of other things, but these are some of the points that I took away personally. And I'm sure that a lot of our participants here have a lot of observations and comments and questions. So I would like to begin with a question from Padmaja Mishra. And they're asking, nowadays I observe that people are taking a middle path for most of the things, be it a sensitive topic or a normal day-to-day talk. In such a situation, can we say that someone who is outspoken is necessarily arrogant? Or is it apt to keep this non-judgmental facade out and say that it depends, like most of us say when we are asked to take a side?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. See,
notion of Guestroot comes. This very notion of Guestroot comes, it's an integral part of the indigenous Maori culture of New Zealand.
Hello.
And one of the scholars who has worked with the Maori community very closely, Graham Harvey, writes about this particular methodology of Guestroot, where he says that you see, what happens in the Maori culture, if you enter into a Maori community...
Meher, I can hear a recording at the background. I can hear my recording at the background. I don't know from where
it is fine now?
Yeah, it is fine now. Yeah. Okay, thank you. No worries. So, so as I was saying that, see, thank you so much for this question.
Yes, sir.
Now, the point is, as I said, you know, the aspect about the invisible versions or the invisible violence of postmodernity is that what happens, it is always very difficult to put them in a specific categorical structure. That is very problematic. Now, how to identify an outspokenness as arrogance? Now, an outspokenness as arrogance, what we see, another very common view in the social media. Now, suppose two people are arguing about a particular political ideology. Now, suppose what happens, a left-wing political idealist say that right-wing is rubbish, and a right-wing political idealist say left-wing is rubbish, and they are having different forms of, now, you know, there are ways of indulging in this argument. Now, for instance, it is between me and somebody. Now, I have a particular political ideology and I present my arguments in a very critical, structured, referential, experiential manner. And so does the person in front of me does that. That is one way of discussing. And that is could be an example of outspokenness. Now, what happens nowadays in a lot of social media discussions is, suppose somebody is not agreeing with my viewpoints, immediately I'll indulge in calling out the name of the person, hurling abuses about the parents, the children, the family of the person. And the person in front of me also does that, throwing threats, life threats, etc. Now, that is not outspokenness. Now, if 50 people, 100 people like my abuse, that doesn't really qualify me to be an outspoken person. That basically qualifies me to be an abusive person, even at the end of the day. So obviously, that is what I was sharing, that, you know, this critical mindset of approach is very important. When I'm presenting an argument, if I have a disagreement with you, 100 times, million times, you can have a disagreement with me, I can have a disagreement with you. But we need to share our disagreements with each other in a respectful and a logical manner. Not by abusing each other, not by shouting at each other, not by threatening each other, or trying to show how much muscle power we each have. Now, if that is happening, that is nothing more than an, it's a kind of arrogance. So obviously, we cannot be, and this very indulgence or saying that I am apolitical or I am non-judgmental is totally a false concept. In this world, nobody is apolitical, nobody is non-judgmental. Even when I am saying that I don't believe in politics, I am actually politicizing my conversation. When I say that I am a non-judgmental person, I make a judgment to say that I am a non-judgmental person. So I really don't believe in these discourses, honestly, that whether we really can be a non-judgmental person. It depends on the context to understand that arrogance. But yes, what is important is instead of being silent, we need to call out that arrogance in a collective way right there. We need to tell that this is not discussion what you are doing. You are basically being arrogant towards each other and no one is supported in that part. Rather than taking someone's arrogant side and saying that, oh, you are doing great.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And the thing about your responses as well as your speech and your talk is that it raises more and more questions, not out of criticism, but out of pure enthusiasm to know more. So I have a few more questions here. Subhashini Ramachandran says, good evening, sir. My question is a little cynical, but the idea of dissent in the present socio-political platform has even led to, in certain cases, sedition. So, in a socio-political atmosphere like this, how do we register our dissent against the master narrative?
No, absolutely. And as I said, when this violence gets built up, these negativities gets built up, it did not happen on a single day. It has been socio-historically researched, structured, and then disseminated amongst the people. So to really question and dismantle these negative approaches as something we acknowledge as postmodern smartness or whatever, outspokenness or whatever we say, we use the jargons. We need to do it gradually, and with the passage of time, only we can do that. And you are absolutely right. When we do a call out, we often have to face arrest. It's been happening in the Indian political scenario and also in the global political scenario for decades, where if you speak about a particular political ideology, which is dominant at that particular point of time, you subject yourself to a lot of risk, life risk, and so many things. Now, to do that, what is important is the collective resistance, the necessity of collective resistance. If instead of 1 people or 50 people call out, if every one of us have this consciousness that we should be the side of that particular person who is speaking the truth, and we call, and it often happens. It often happens. We have seen such strong resistance at different instances of time, where one person who has spoken the truth has been, and he or she has called out, and that person has been arrested, and everybody from the country has come to the streets and have said that we want the release of the person because that person has spoken the truth. And the dominant structure who has unleashed this violence ultimately has to surrender to truth. So we have examples. It's not that it has not happened so far, but what has not happened is the consistency and the continuity. It will happen after a few years again, for things just dies down, the enthusiasm dies down, the people keep on suffering. Those who are speaking out the problems, the challenges, they are being marginalized. Those who are siding with the violators, they are being acknowledged and celebrated. So why we can't continue with the momentum? It is not just because we fail to do so, because it is our mindset. We have been socio-historically engineered in that manner, in that template of violence, where we have been taught that violence, if you take the side of the violence, you will be celebrated. And if you don't take the side of violence, you will be marginalized and criticized. So, this socio-historical upbringing, and from where does it start? It just can't start right here, right now. We need to start for sure. But right here, right now, we need to also see as an example of a citing that how violence gets embedded right from the very childhood days within a child. From that state of upbringing, we need to teach our younger generation that what is violent and what is non-violence, why it is necessary to being reciprocative, why it is necessary not to indulge in body shaming. You will see people indulge in body shaming, even small kids, very small kids. They have all those sorts of nicknames which we just laugh at, nicknames in terms of somebody's body shape, nicknames in terms of somebody's skin color, nicknames in terms of somebody's hair pattern. And we just take it as something very easy, as if, they are kids and they just have fun. No, they don't have fun. People who are being body shamed on a daily basis, you have ample of examples where children suffer from the trauma of body shaming at schools, at homes, in their neighborhood. So that upbringing, that transformation has to be right from that childhood stage. It just can't happen all of a sudden. We just can't have a burst of transformation and things just change tomorrow, because the violence has actually piled up with the passage of time.
Thank you for that response, sir. And also thank you to the one who asked the question, because I had a similar question. I was thinking about what you said. You said that we need to create a space for respect and not so much for consensus. But, I wanted to know from you, and you've already answered it, but I just was thinking that to be a change maker is difficult, especially in a place that is well established and has been established for long. And by place, I of course mean organizations and just discursive spaces. So like you said, collective resistance is the key to it, and that can actually be triggered or led by an individual who has tried to raise their voice and has been wrongly punished for it. So thank you for that response, and thank you for the wonderful questions that are coming in. So one more, Shatakshi is asking that during these times, while news channels have a great responsibility of showing truth, as it hugely affects a vast range of people, being ridiculously partial and running propaganda has become a common practice. How dangerous is it, and what is the best way to save ourselves from it?
Well, the simple way to save us, which is actually very simple, but we don't indulge, is not to fall into the trap of the propaganda. And how to do that? Not to really get flowed with what the news channels feeds us. Now, obviously, one thing it is for sure that those who are not working in the field of media, we are sitting back at home and listening to the news channels for all the things. What happens is, obviously, in such a kind of scenario, in such a kind of situation, we have no other options than to accept what the news channel feeds us. But also, rather than being blind, we should try to also somewhat be critical and use our mindset, our common sense when we read or we try to understand every news. You see, it's very simple. Violence gets, not in all cases, obviously, but in many cases, violence gets unleashed because the one who is being violated allows the violence to get unleashed. And as I said, not in all cases. In certain cases, there are no options. We are aware. But in many cases, we have options where we can not let the violence affect us, not let the violator violate us. But we, out of happiness, we do that. And there are various factors that underlie that kind of intention. There could be self-profiting intention. There could be intention of just being, not being aware of the scenario, and many other factors. But it happens. So, propagandism, now for example, during COVID-19, we have seen that how communal violences were surging up, how Islamophobia was surging up within India and different parts of the world. Fake videos, were all being circulated across to promote some kind of communal propagandas. Now, if we don't use our mindset, now we have our own ways. We have our own mindset. We can do some readings. We can talk to some sensible people, and we can come to a conclusion that these are false videos. But instead of doing that, what we are more interested in is to keep on forwarding those trash propagandist videos to people around and circulating false notion. Just because, again, I'm saying, it happens. One of the major reason is being in the bad faith, because it doesn't affect me personally. So what's wrong? I'm just sitting free. I have no other work. Let me just forward this video to somebody else. So, we need to bring this very critical mindset in our daily ways of thinking. within our daily life. That is one way, amongst various possibilities, that is one way where we can bring this transformation in this postmodernist space to eradicate this postmodern violence in our daily life.
Thank you for that response, sir. We have another question from Binish Mir, and they're asking, what is the postmodern view of folk tales?
Well, I mean, it depends obviously on the folk tales that you are reading. But as we know that folk tales where actually has a lot of, it actually resonates a lot of stories in various metaphors, in various myths and various structures about our present state of existence, about different dimensions of contemporary state of existence. So obviously, it depends which particular folk tales we are reading, but if we need to have a postmodernist understanding of different folk tales, the important thing for us, one possible way of approaching folk tales is that where we relate the characters, where we relate the incidents and the narratives in the context of our present scenario, in the context of our personal experiences, collective experiences, and various other socio-political experiences that we encounter around us.
Thank you for that response, sir. Annie Saifi is asking, how can one define and differentiate postmodernism in relation to contemporary and traditional ways of life?
Well, my counter question to this particular question is, can we really differentiate postmodernism with respect to contemporary traditional way of life? Because if we would have been able to differentiate, I don't think we would have been sitting here and brainstorming about the violence of postmodernism and not being able to realize the violence of postmodernism. It is, you see, I mean, postmodernism, let us understand it, is that the way we understand postmodernism again is just the physical structures, you know, the physical structures in terms of malls, restaurants, dressing patterns, brands, etc. But the thing is, more violence lies in its invisible structures, which keeps on feeding these physical structures, keeps on maintaining these physical structures. So my point is, what I understand very categorically is that really, in terms of contemporary and traditional way of life, we can't really segregate this element of postmodernism. And again, when you bring this question of traditional way of life, let me tell you, the very concept of modernism or postmodernism that we talk about is a very Eurocentric concept. But the interesting part is, every moment, every community in its respectable points of time has its own stages of modernity. Now, we have ample of examples of indigenous science, indigenous technologies across the world. But do we acknowledge them? To what extent do we acknowledge them? We don't. We fail to acknowledge them. So modernities, postmodernities had its own difference. So there could be no one modernity. There could be no one postmodernity. Postmodernity with capital P is problematic. Modernity with a capital M is problematic for me. We have modernities, we have postmodernities. It is a philosophy of pluralism. It is a pluralistic philosophical space. So if we look at, and if we try to look at this particular dimension from this mindset, we will find that every indigenous community, every indigenous societies had their own versions of modernities and postmodernities at different points of time. So we really don't need to segregate it. And obviously any effort to segregate is also impossible and quite problematic, because sometimes it ends up to be extremely restrictive and extremely monotonous to a vast extent. So instead of trying to segregate it, trying to differentiate it, let us think of how can we dismantle that Eurocentric modernization with a capital M, or a Eurocentric postmodernization with a capital P, and break it and understand it as postmodernities like an archipelago, like an archipelagic concept. This concept is actually widely drawn from the idea of archipelagic memories and fragments, what Ananya Jahanara Kabir and Ari Gautier, two very good philosophers, two very good thinkers in the contemporary times, often talk about in their lectures and reflections. And we need to understand this very notion of knowledge production, very notion of postmodern space as an archipelagic space. What happens in an archipelago? A group of islands, all coexisting with each other. They have different geographies, different topographies, they have differences, but still they're coexisting with each other. We need to build up an archipelagic space, an archipelagic knowledge space for ourselves, where we coexist with each other in spite of the dissensus.
Thank you, sir. And a lot of thoughts come, and it's hard to keep track of our thoughts sometimes when we're listening to such engaging and enlightening things. But thank you, sir. Let's move on with the questions. So Pooja Joshi says, "Good evening. I would like sir to kindly respond to the idea of spaces in postmodernism. Please elaborate on the role of space in postmodern narratives."
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it is postmodernism or any other theoretical perspective, it is necessary for us to take into consideration I would call it both a phenomenon and a philosophy of space. Now, the point is, what I always try to do, what I always try to invite towards is to think about those spaces which are not visible, which are invisible spaces. And postmodernity, because now see, when I'm talking of postmodernity, obviously I particularly chose to reflect on the violence of postmodernity. But obviously that doesn't mean that I'm trying to create a narrative that, oh, postmodern is violent, just throw it out. No, I'm not saying that. Again, let me clarify. But when for this context of this reflection, for the context of this lecture, if I'm looking at the violent spaces of postmodernity, it is important for us to identify those spaces. And those spaces can be everywhere. Those spaces can be right within our family, in our society, in our friend spaces, in our own mind, in our own body. Those spaces could be everywhere. And we really need to be very mindful of our spaces. And that is why we should teach ourselves how much to speak, what to speak, to what extent to speak, what are the form of sentence structure I'm implementing when I'm speaking. We should be very mindful of these particular aspects when we're engaging with postmodern spaces. Now, obviously, there are a lot of space theorists across the world who are talking about spaces. Now, for instance, but what we need to understand is there are also certain spaces of in-betweennesses, like certain in-between spaces, which cannot be subjected to any particular category, any particular compartment. And those spaces are very complex, very entangled, always overlapping with each other. How do we identify those spaces in a postmodern structure? Or when we are trying to address postmodern violences, any form of violence in postmodernization, how do we address those particular spaces? That is another very, very important thing.
Right, sir. And I think in the previous response, you were talking about, physical structures versus invisible structures. Do you think, and this is my question, but I'll also attach one of our participants' question with it. I was thinking that art is also a physical structure, right? We have architecture, we have paintings, even literature. It's also a physical structure through which postmodernism is reflected. But do you think that it also encourages us to look beyond that particular artwork and see through it into the invisible structures that you were talking about? Adding to that, there is a question by Hemanti Bagdi who asks, can we say that a postmodern perspective is always translucent?
Well, yes. I mean, to respond to the two questions together, absolutely. I'll start with Hoymanti's question, which actually then connects to your particular question, Meher. So obviously, it is a state of being translucence, and in between states are always a space of translucence where you just can't come forward, and it's not a possibility to come forward and describe or to kind of define every space, every structure in a very in a very concrete manner, if I put in that way. Certain things, as you see, the translucence, and I think it also connects to the previous question of space, where we look at those in-betweennesses, in-between perspectives, and where actually we cannot really see things clearly, we cannot understand things clearly. They're always in a state of haziness. They're always in a state of incompleteness. And we have to acknowledge this incompleteness. And that is also what, postmodern artworks actually invites us to do. We obviously look beyond the artwork, and we have this, especially with abstract arts, where we connect with different perspectives of our existence in our own ways, in our own contexts. And why do we acknowledge abstract arts? Because it allows us, it gives us that space to come in, to walk in and understand it in our own ways, rather than trying to understand it, or rather than imposing its own thoughts, own perspectives, and own ideas on us. So I think in that perspective, in that way, obviously, translucence is an integral part of postmodern understanding, whether we are going for literary works, artworks, whether we are looking at the people around or anything in a postmodern space.
Thank you, sir. We have a lot of people joined in through our YouTube live, and so I would like to pose a question from there. So Sayukta Datta is asking, don't you think that postmodernism too follows the dictations of Eurocentrism and capitalism to a certain extent? The question, sir, should I repeat that?
Yes. I think I just lost you for some time, so I couldn't hear you.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, sir. So Sayukta Datta on our YouTube live is asking, don't you think postmodernism too follows the dictations of Eurocentrism and capitalism to a certain extent?
Well, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is what I also, very categorically argued when I was reflecting that postmodernism does follow a lot of, and that is the point which I critiqued actually. When I was talking about the violence of postmodernism, I was talking about those Euro-North American perspectives of violence about postmodernism. And also I've been talking about, and the point is, we need to look at how methodologically we can overcome that violence. I mean, that violence is hidden everywhere in our curriculums, in our pedagogical patterns, in our assignment patterns, examination patterns, and several other patterns. It's around everywhere in our ways we talk, the way we interpret beauty, the way we interpret ugliness, the way we interpret good, the way we interpret bad, and so many other stuffs. So we really need to, bring into this particular consideration that when we are looking at the Eurocentric, Euro-North American centric perceptions of postmodernization or postmodernity, it is very crucial to look at into our everyday life. Our usual tendency is always to, hire a few theorists and the philosophers, quote them, put them in our articles, in our reflections, and then we consider ourselves we are done. But I mean, obviously, we need to write, we need to speak, we need to build scholarships. But the thing is, how we are transforming things at the grassroots level, what I am bringing to the society when I'm talking about transformation. So in that case, how do we transform that in our everyday life? And when you try to do that, and again, I speak from my personal experience, when you try to do that at a very personal level, you see there is a lot of gap between the theoretical preachings and the practical experiences. The practical experiences are always, as some of you were saying, is translucent. It's very complex. It's always very entangled with each other.
Thank you for your kind response to both our questions, sir. And if only you say so, we'll continue with the questions. We
That's
have
fine.
some.
No, I'm happy. If you guys are not getting late, I'm more than happy.
Great, sir. So Subhashini Ramachandran has asked, do you not think state violence has a role to play in subduing dissent? Was I audible, sir?
Yes. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir. Now you are. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Yes. So, I mean, obviously, state violence, central violence, the repressive state apparatuses, the idle state apparatuses are always there to, subdue us, to subjugate us. And, we talk about idle state apparatuses and they just invade our private spaces as well. The kind of subjugations that we often face from our family, from our relatives, from our neighborhoods is also a result of a lot from what we draw from the idle state apparatuses and the repressive state apparatuses. So obviously, I mean, in different ways, the state is there to violate us. So, that is in a very interesting book, actually by John Komarov and Jean Komarov. It's called The Law and Disorder in the Post-Colony, where the Komarovs actually talk about very interestingly that how violence or state instigated violence actually, or any form of institutionally instigated violence works parallelly, that law and order works parallelly with hand in hand with violence. So first you create the moment of crisis very deliberately, and then you come as a rescuer. Oh, we are sorry, we created the crisis, we want to rescue now. So until unless you create the crisis, you don't get that image of rescuer. And if you have no image of rescuer, you are not getting votes from the people, as simple as that. So for that, you need to create the crisis. First, you create a pothole, make sure that 2 to 3 accidents happen, and then you come up with your mindset, with this attitude, with this, presence that, oh, you want to rescue, you realize the mistake. So this is how, it works. It works like a cycle.
And that's interesting, sir. It's like someone who wishes to be a hero needs to first yell it out and say that he's a hero or act it out. Thank you, sir. There's another question from Padmaja Mishra, and they're asking, can we say that the false notions of postmodernism is somewhat pushing the marginalized more into that abyss?
Yes, absolutely. It is. It is doing that because what happens today. I mean, one of the simplest example is having smartphones, owning smartphones. I mean, one of the basic example. It's like you need to have a smartphone, no matter even if you fail to feed your family, even if you fail to get clothes for yourself, even if you fail to get yourself a basic house to stay in, but you need to have a smartphone. Otherwise, and the very name is so problematic. When we say the smartphone, the very name itself, the connotation is itself so problematic, because in our practical ways of existence, we can see with ample of examples around us, including our own self, that how much unsmart we are becoming with the smartphones. In terms of, because we are everything is structured within emojis, forwarded videos, voice messages, etc. So we are not getting time to think what we are saying, what we are doing, what we are thinking, what we are structuring. Are they making any sense? Are they right? Is it not going to hurt somebody? Is it not going to put somebody into problem? We have failed to think. We just do it. We think we are smart, we just serve up and down, we just forward informations here and there without even considering the fact whether the information is right, whether it's making any sense or not. So obviously, this one example could actually teach us million of things, like how postmodernism is putting every person, every individual, even the marginalized, into this abyss. Because we are postmodern. This violence of Eurocentric postmodernism actually teaches us, actually pushes us into this imaginary land of happiness. It first takes us into this land, traps us into that space, and then when we realize, oh no, we have come into the wrong space, all our gateways to escape is over. That is how, postmodernism works hand in hand with capitalism in a both seductive as well as a coercive manner, where violence and seduction goes hand in hand.
Right. Thank you, sir. And I think that already answers our last question here, but I'll just state it out to you in case you would like to add on something to it. So Radha Singh is asking, does postmodernism really make man selfish in respect to society?
Obviously. And postmodernism also creates for us problematic gender structures as well. That is why we still stick to this notion of man being selfish. Well, you see, the point is, this is another violence of postmodernism that has been unleashed upon us. Though we are talking so much about gender neutral languages, the necessity about transforming the grammar of violence as well. Now, how violence is unleashed through the words, the phrases, the clauses, the sentences that we use to refer to some people, to interact with people. So obviously, we as humans, that is what postmodernism, one of the violence of postmodernity is teaching us, this human civilization, to be selfish, to be self-centric, to be self-profiting. Understand your own good, exploit somebody else for your own good, and leave. So obviously, at the practical level, as we have been interacting, at the practical level, we need to keep on asking this question: how do we overcome these negativities of postmodernism in our real life? How do those theories and the philosophies that we read can be translated practically into our daily existence?
Thank you so much. So absolutely wonderful. I would love to read out some of the comments that have been put on the YouTube Live as well as on our Google Meet chat. So Shatrupa Mishra is saying, thank you, Dr. Dey, for raising so many questions. It is interesting that while postmodernism problematizes the concept of selfhood, you propose that guesthood could be a viable way of going beyond absolutes. Your talk also makes us wonder about how much willfulness is there in what we will do today, a concept that Sarah Ahmed touches upon. And then we also have a lot of comments on our YouTube Live. Sanyukta Datta says, we need to have the ability to understand and accept our flaws and the boldness to rectify others' flaws, but not with the mindset to insult them or to establish ourselves as bold and modern. And thank you so much, sir. if you go through the chat boxes on both the platforms, you'll see how much love you've been receiving, because you've really forced us to think and question, which is exactly what we started this session with, the need to question. So thank you to all the participants as well for raising questions, for giving your opinions, your observations, and of course, thank you, Dr. Sayan Dey, for all that you have spoken today and encouraged us to think about. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Meher, and thank you so much, participants and the team, for creating this space, for this very interactive space with your reflections and the questions. And hope we continue with this discussion at different points of time with our own self, as also along with that, with each other in different points of time. So thank you so much, and I also express my gratitude and best wishes for the event to continue in this similar interactive way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. And with that, I would now like to call Shivangi from AIFEST to kindly proceed with the informative activities that we have planned for you. Please do participate if possible. They are optional. Yes, please note they are completely optional. Thank you. Shivangi, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you so much, Meher, and a very good evening to all of you. I am Shivangi Gandhi, and I am a Public Relation Officer at IFEST. Ritu, are you there? Ritu?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, hi Ritu. Can you please share the screen?
The screen. Hi everybody, I'm also a member at AIFEST. Good to see you all. And we are going to engage you in some pretty interesting activities. This is not at all mandatory. The next lecture will start from 7 p.m. This is just some activities as an ice-breaking session to get all of you interacting, and we are having some basic fun. And the first session will be handled by Shivangi for the quiz, and then we'll move on to the dictionary. So I'll be moving on to the presentation of the quiz.
Yeah. So before we start, I have 2 pointers to make. Once you answer, please make sure that you don't answer in your chat boxes. Please unmute yourself and answer. Second, I would love to see your vibrant faces while you answer. So if it's possible for you, please switch on your camera as well. Thank you so much. And yes, there is no negative marking. This quiz is just for, just to refresh our memory, just to refresh our knowledge, like what we have gathered over the years, just to refresh that. So please do participate. Although it's optional activity, I do understand, but we would be really, really happy if you do participate.
Is it visible?
No, Ritu, it's not visible.
I'll try it again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's visible, Ritu. Thank you so much. Yeah. So let's begin with the fun. So first question is, who introduced postmodernism into the discourses on philosophy and social sciences? A. Michel Foucault. B. Clifford Geertz. C. Jürgen Habermas. Or is it D. Jean-Francois Lyotard?
Hello, ma'am. I think it's Michel Foucault, if I'm right.
Okay, is it final answer? Any more?
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody else wants to answer?
Yes, ma'am. I think it is Michel Foucault.
Michel Foucault,
Option
yes.
A.
Okay, but the correct answer is Lyotard. So it's D. Jean-Francois Lyotard. Okay, let's move forward. C. The correct answer is Jean-Francois Lyotard. So the second question is, who wrote the foreword to the postmodern condition? I repeat, who wrote foreword to the postmodern condition? A. Is it Frederick Jameson? B. Jürgen Habermas? C. Julia Kristeva? Or is it D. Lucy Irigaray?
I think it's Frederick Jameson.
Yes. Any more answers?
We can have more guesses than one.
Yeah,
We
of
may
course. We are all, there's no negative marking as I just said.
Is it Lewis Irigere?
Okay. So now if anybody wants to do a phone a friend can do it. That's the only lifeline we have. So what should I book? Like, is it A or is it what somebody else said? Irigre, right?
Yeah,
So
D.
what?
Ma'am, Jurgen Habermas.
Okay. So I'll just tell you the final answer. It's Frederick Jameson.
Oh God.
Yes. So clap for the one who said Frederick Jameson. Okay, moving further.
Ma'am, difficult questions are there.
No worries. I just said it's just to check how much we actually know and how much we more need to delve into this whole concept of postmodernism. Okay, so let's move further. Okay. Who stated, and I quote, image has more dignity than the original, unquote. I repeat, who stated, I quote, image has more dignity than the original, unquote. A. Is it John Baudrillard? B. Perry Giles? C. Slavoj Zizek? And D. Daniel Bootston.
Ma'am, it should be Jean Baudrillard. It should be Jean Baudrillard.
Okay, so Gulista says, I hope I'm pronouncing your name fine. So you said
Yes, ma'am.
it's Gulista, Miss Gulista said it's John Baudrillard. Any more answers?
Yes, ma'am. A. Jane Baudrillard.
Okay, so Shatakshi said it's Baudrillard. Okay, any more answers?
We have many takers for Baudrillard, but
No takers for the one which actually has the answer in it. Any more takers?
Ma'am, it can be
John
Daniel.
Baudrillard.
Okay, so maximum are saying A. It's Jean Baudrillard, right?
Ma'am, Daniel Brustine.
Yes, who said that? Simran Tripathi?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that's the correct answer. It's, yes, Daniel Bootston. Okay, so let's move further.
great job, Simran. That was the first
Yes,
correct answer.
all in.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so our next question is, the inaugural movement of postmodern feminism could be located in the works of, and I repeat, the inaugural movement of postmodern feminism could be located in the works of A. Simone de Beauvoir, B. Judith Butler, C. Julia Kristeva, or is it D. Helen Sixu?
Is it B. Judith Butler?
Shatakshi says
It's for
Judith Butler.
Simon de Beauvoir.
Okay, Radha Singh says Simon
De Beauvoir.
Okay, Simon de Beauvoir. Any more takers?
Ma'am, I think it should be Judith Butler because of the gender performativity concept.
Yes, very rightly said, Gulista. And Radha Singh also said Judith Butler, I suppose. Yeah.
No.
Yes, so it's Judith Butler. Yes, and very rightly pointed out, Gulista, she talks about this whole idea of gender performity, like how actually we are, so how a woman sits and how she's supposed to behave in a society. That's what she actually talks about. Yes, gender performity is a concept by Judith Butler. Okay, so let's move further. Now it's an interesting question. LHOOQ by Duchamp is, and I repeat, LHOOQ by Duchamp is A. Parody of Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, B. Art installation of urinal as a fountain, C. A replica of Dali's The Persistence of Memory, or is it D. A parody of Munch's The Scream? I know everybody knows about Munch's The Scream. Yeah?
The answer is A.
Yes. A very
Guys,
quick
just
answer, Sparsh.
Take your time. We have time.
Exact
Just
time,
read the
yes.
question. Imagine the pictures. Postmodernism is not only about the books. We have paintings.
Yes, we have
audio.
architecture, we have music. Yes, very rightly, Sparsh said it's a parody of Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, and a clap for you. A very quick answer. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The quiz is really interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, let's move forward. According to Jameson, we now inhabit dash. I repeat, according to Jameson, I quote, we now inhabit dash, unquote. A, the symbolic, B, the diachronic, C, the synchronic, or is it D, the dialogic?
Ma'am, say the synchronic.
Okay, Nidhi Thakur says it's C, the synchronic.
A, the symbolic.
Shatakshi says A, the symbolic. Okay, let's book it at final answer. Final answer.
I think
A,
symbolic.
the symbolic.
Okay, so Satakshi says it's A, the symbolic. But the correct answer is Nidhi's answer. That is the synchronic. Nidhi, ka clap for you.
Okay.
Good job, great job, Nidhi. Okay, let's move further. William Blake reportedly appeared in a hallucinatory dream of which postmodernist poet? I repeat, William Blake reportedly appeared in a hallucinatory dream of which famous postmodernist poet? A. Michael Palmer, B. Allen Ginsberg, C. Samuel Beckett, or is it D. Suzanne Hall?
Michael Palmer.
So Simran says Michael Palmer.
Samuel Beckett.
Satakshi says Samuel Beckett.
Ma'am, B. Ellen Ginsberg.
Who said Ellen Ginsberg?
Nidhi Thakur.
Nidhi.
Nidhi. Great job again, Nidhi. Yes, it's a beat poet, Ellen Ginsberg. Very rightly said. Nidhi is doing a great job, huh? Okay, let's move further. Now this might appear as a net question. Just joking. Okay, so elaborate JOMOPS. I repeat, elaborate JOMOPS. A. Journal of Modernism and Postmodernism Studies. B. Journal of Modernist and Postmodernist Studies.
It's A.
Yes,
It's
it is
A, ma'am.
Before even I said all the options, Radha Singh is on point. Yes, it's A, Journal of Modernism and Postmodernism Studies. Clap for you. A very quick response. Okay. Now we all know Joseph Heller's famous novel. Okay. In which novel of his did Joseph Heller write, I quote, he knew everything there was to know about literature except how to enjoy it, I unquote. And I repeat, in which novel of his did Joseph Heller write, I quote, he knew everything there was to know about literature except how to enjoy it, unquote. A. Closing Time. B. Catch-22. C. Picture This. Or is it D. Something Happened?
Is it
D, something
I'm
happened.
not sure. Maybe it's B, Catch-22.
Is it B?
Okay. Radha Singh said it's Catch-22. Okay.
Option C. Yes, Catch-22.
That's
22. Option C.
We
No
have
more
taken
taken?
option D too.
Option C. Option C. Picture this.
Okay. Annie
Option C,
said-
ma'am. Option C.
Okay. Annie says, Miss Annie says,
Picture this.
picture this. Okay. So these are the two
Annie
new
say pic-
options.
Something happened?
Yes, Satakshi,
Yes, ma'am.
guess it right. Clap for you. Great job. Yes,
My
it's
first
something
correct
happened.
answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
High
something
five.
happened. Congratulations, Shatakshi.
Satakshi,
Thank you, ma'am.
congratulations. You have, moved a step forward in our KBC quiz. Okay. Okay. Now again we have Ellen Ginsberg, a Beat Generation poet. Okay. So Ellen Ginsberg, a Beat Generation poet, dedicated his majority over to an ailing family member. Who was it? Mother, wife, father, or brother?
This will be a final question. So,
Yes.
if there is
Let's
anyone,
get to this.
B, brother.
Satakshi said B, brother. Okay. Any more answer? Any more guesses?
And I think father. C, father.
Okay. So Simran said C, father. Now two options are left. Okay. P.
It's father.
Okay, father. Any more answers?
It's father.
Option B, wife.
Okay. Now the final answer is I won this time. So the final answer is mother.
Oh, yeah,
Wow.
mother.
Yes.
No
And
one had
thank
request
you.
for mother.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yes. And thank you so very much for that active participation. I hope that this quiz has really added to your existing knowledge, and hope you could take back something out of it. Now over to Richu for Pictionary. Now she has one more interesting game, and
Ma'am, excuse me.
yes,
I have something. Can you please share these questions with us later?
yeah, definitely. We'll do that in the group.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much, Satakshi. Yeah. So now Richu will be drawing some pictures. So, like she'll be drawing the titles of some postmodern works. Our task is to guess those titles from the pictures she draw. She'll give you some little clues here and there by saying as well. So you need to guess the final work. So are we all ready? Are we all pepped up, charged?
Yeah, I would encourage more people to come on video and
Yes,
for those who
we
haven't
would
tried-
really like if you could please turn off or turn on your cameras. It would be really great to see your vibrant faces.
and we can take more options. Anyone who is silent till now, they are welcome to speak
Yes.
out. Try.
Okay.
Wrong options are welcome too. Wrong options just lead us to the
Yes.
correct path. So, yeah, Sanjita Datta has come on camera. Hi, Sanjita. Hi, Shidakshi.
Let's Damsharaj.
It's Damsharaj but on a board, a whiteboard with a black marker.
Thank you so much for turning on your cameras. It means it means a lot to us. Thank you so very much. Okay, Richu, let's begin.
The same. So we'll go to the session because we have a lecture coming up at 7 p.m. So
Yes. So we'll just get started.
So this pictures just symbolize the title of the work. Okay, guys. So you can see the symbol, Shivangi?
Yes, I can see the symbol, Richu.
Everyone can see the symbol?
Yes.
Yes, Ritu.
Yes. And yeah, this is the title. Can I get guesses? What does the symbol say?
Infinity.
Infinite.
Yes.
Infinite. And the works start with infinite. I am very generous with clues. This is a work by David Foster Wallace.
Yes.
And the first word is infinite. The second word is actually symbolized by the smiley. What is the smiley doing, man?
Maybe he's too excited for the conference.
Infinite happiness.
Infinite jest. That's right. Brinda PG.
Yes.
Just
Brinda, great job.
Thank you so much for getting the gist of this. Now we'll
Okay.
straight away go to the second work.
Yes.
So Valentine's Day is coming up, and
Yes.
this is a picture. This is a flower that is very important during the Valentine's Day. And this is a work that is actually written by Umberto Eco, and it is a very interesting work and a postmodernist in every sense. Let me get guesses. So I said that this is a flower related to Valentine's Day. So most obviously, which will be that flower, guys?
Yes. I hope everyone knows this.
The rose.
Yeah, the rose. The rose is there, and then the rose comes actually in the second part of this work. The first part.
The name of the rose.
Yes. Shavleen.
I didn't
Who said
get it. Thank you, Shavleen.
Shavleen.
It is the name of the rose. I was about to draw the picture of an identity card, if that matters. The name of the rose by Umberto Eco was our second work. You guys are such a great audience. Thank you so much. So many people are coming on video, and you are greatly responsive. Now, let me go to the next work.
You are such a good painter.
Oh my God.
Ritu, you just got a compliment.
So I was going international. Now I'm going to come in. Now I'm coming Indian, and this guy is actually Indian, but he is international. So
Wow, Ritu.
So just focus on the time, right?
And just Ritu, just say that famous dialogue we were discussing in the morning.
I mix it, man.
Midnight children.
Oh my God. I cannot even finish my.
I just gave them an idea. They picked it up.
We should withhold our clues. I mean, I should have please finish my pictures. Thank you, Sanjukta ma'am. It is midnight.
Thank you, Sanjukta ma'am.
I just drew midnight and I was about to quote.
Yes, we were about to quote. And then
Jawaharlal Nehru and the tries to destiny as the entire world sleeps, India awakes to her meeting with the destiny. So I'm not even getting to finish my pictures. The response is so active. Now
and we are really, really glad for that.
Yeah,
also, Richu, you're a great artist. So
man, this is going live on YouTube, right? Please don't kill me.
She's giving up a lot of clues too, but good go.
Hi, ma'am.
Meena ma'am, we want to encourage people. We don't want to discourage people. No.
I like the spirit of you people. Yeah, go ahead. I'll talk.
I'm going to go into the next work. Most probably you will say it even before finishing my work. I'm going to stick with the clock.
Okay.
So there's 12. You don't need to mark the time, but this clock is important because the clock really comes up during the my board sort of jumped on me. I'm sorry. So this is
Richu, your board just got excited.
Yeah, I think it can't keep just jumping.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
And this is a fruit. So earlier we spoke about a flower.
Clockwork orange. Clockwork orange.
Oh my God, Bindusri, that's correct.
Yes, Bindusri, right. It's clockwork orange.
Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. I mean, you really need rest before the lecture at 7 p.m. So I will go on for 2 more pictures.
Yes, we can. Ritu, we have time.
Okay, but the lecture starts at 7, right?
It's 6:50.
6:50. So I'll go on for 5 more minutes and then.
Yes.
This is just too much easy. I mean, so I am going to depict 2 people. They are so happy.
Waiting for Godot.
That is not
that is not the point, Sanjukta.
So this is a ball and they're playing, okay?
So like basically these 2 boys are playing with a ball.
Good evening, Kanisma.
Good evening, Kanisma.
They're playing ball and this game has a name. If I write the second thing, you will get it easily because we already discussed this.
Let them allow to decipher this thing first. Like, what are they actually doing? They're playing with a ball. These 2 balls, these 2 boys are playing with a ball. And what we do when we actually play with a ball?
What do you do?
What do you do with a ball?
Catch 22.
Correct. Yes. Oh God. This was the entire thing. Catch me too. Thank you so much. Who was the one who said it?
I think Radha Singh said it.
Yes.
Miss Radha Singh said it. Congratulations, ma'am.
We discussed that question in the quiz too, so it was just too much.
Yes, it was there.
So the audience is getting excited, and I am really happy for you guys being such a responsive audience. Now I'm going to go to the next picture. So I'm going to draw an animal. Guess the animal, because so many people spend so much time, watching YouTube videos of this wonderful, adorable
Cat and Shakespeare.
Yeah, cat is there.
Cat is there, of course.
It's maybe cat's cradle.
Oh, nice. Thank you, Radha ma'am, for saving me the trouble of drawing the cradle.
He was about to draw that cradle, and before that happened,
Radha Singh ma'am has already told about cat's cradle. It is cat's cradle, and we really need to be thankful for Kurt Vonnegut because he is such a great man, putting so much postmodern works. And now I am really going to wind up with one final picture, which will be very important for us in the coming paper presentations too. Shivangi will get this. So I'm going to draw a bloody picture, black and white people, a bloody picture. So there are 5 people,
And Ritu just gave a clue as well. She said that name of the author just now, 2 seconds back.
Yes. Did
Slaughterhouse
someone
5.
say?
Yes,
Sunday
somebody
Collector,
said.
that's
Yes,
correct. Slaughterhouse 5, that is going to be the name of one of our rooms for paper presentations.
yes, it's one of the names of our, houses as well. So it's Slaughterhouse 5.
So
I
was
think
going
I
to.
will be in that house.
Ritu?
One is slaughterhouse, yeah, in room number
Yes,
2 or something like that.
yes.
Yeah.
We have 2 houses.
Ritu?
One is Slaughterhouse 5 and the other is Palace of
Yeah,
Illusion.
this was the final mayor. I have
One
one.
second. No. Let's continue till 7 p.m. because this is a fun activity. So it can be taken as part of everyone's break. And of course, if someone wants to take their eyes off the screens, they can definitely take their breaks. But I think everyone is enjoying this activity so much. You should continue to till 7.
This I didn't expect that. Oh my god! I thought I should stop this before but it is because of you guys, audience. I'm so proud of you. You're doing such a great job. I mean, I am not even finishing my pictures, and you're just pulling in guesses. So, thankfully and luckily, we have time for a next picture. Now, I'm going to go into some complicated artwork. Bear with me, huh?
Complicated artwork. Just like postmodernism
Modern
is
art.
complicated. Ritu's drawing is too complicated to decipher.
Just like modern art.
Yes, Satakshi very rightly said.
Is that a snow crystal?
Yes, no, Nina, ma'am, you should allow me to complete my picture, man.
I don't know the titles. I'm just guessing off the picture here.
Oh, thank
What
God.
did you guess, Nina ma'am? What did you guess?
No, she didn't guess. Allow me to complete the picture.
Okay, you didn't guess, Nina ma'am. Continue, Ritu.
I'm really thankful to Nina ma'am for guessing this as a snow crystal instead of spider web. I was afraid that people will say Spider-Man.
It's like a snow crystal.
It looked like a nest too, like too many twigs are there in a nest.
Yeah.
One interpretation.
Yeah, it can also be, I don't know, a vortex sucking us all in this postmodern world or stuff. So
that's too deep.
We need snow, people. We need snow, and I am gonna indicate.
Ritu, you just said your answer. What are you doing?
I'm gonna indicate a weather with these pictures. Which is this weather, man? With snow crystals and people building snowmen.
The winter state?
Yes.
Winter
is there. Winter is there in the title.
Winter is there, and this is a major postmodern work which sort of shifted the course, man. It would be really encouraging if more people came on camera and don't worry about being wrong. Being wrong is the first step to reach
right.
the correct times.
The snowman cometh?
If on a winter's night, angel test complete the
title.
The snowman cometh. No, the iceman cometh.
If on a winter's night, dash. Angel just said it. Now the dash is a traveler. She said it.
Winter night a traveler?
Yeah.
Yes.
If on a winter's night,
Angel test is given the right answer.
We are giving you virtual chocolates. Please imagine that we are giving you virtual chocolates and you are saving
Please share.
Virtual chocolate, virtual
chocolates, virtual hugs,
virtual
everything
hugs.
virtual.
Winter season has just got over, but I reside in the south of India. Well, we haven't seen snow, but anyone who has read If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler will agree with me that it is a mind-boggling experience, right? So, If on a Winter Angel Test, that was a really good guess. I mean,
yes.
Angel Test has already received chocolates.
Yes.
Oh my God.
In virtual world, it's simultaneously, it's synchronic. It happens at the same time, Ritu. She has received it.
I hope you are enjoying the chocolates, Angel Test, and we are gearing up for the final. This will be the final. Otherwise, Abhilash will kill me. He needs to, and you all need to be mentally prepared for his next lecture. So this will be the final picture. No more pictures for you. Guess this one, okay, guys?
Ritu, go ahead. You are doing absolutely great. No worries.
Oh my God, Abhilash sir is here. This will be the final picture, sir, and then you can start off with the lecture. So, I'm showing. Oh, I'm gonna end this in such a sad note. I'm sorry, but this needs crying. This title needs crying.
Just don't write the digits, Ritu. Now you have already said the first word. Let them guess.
Yeah, I will just keep on drawing crying faces.
Why? I will keep on drawing.
Until you know the numbers sound
I
add
got
up.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
I just got your
Count
point.
with me. I think I have drawn 4.
Now there are too many of crying faces.
5.
I have given so many clues.
This is not us. Don't think that I am drawing this state symbolically on here. Everyone is having fun here, right? Just replace this.
This is actually literally crying.
Crash.
Peacock.
Not crash, not crash.
No.
I told crying is there. And
crying is there.
Cry the beloved peacock.
Crying of the Lord. Yeah. Give me the final word.
Ritu, wait.
Slow my tears. 49. I think it's complete with 49.
Yes.
Can you please repeat the words?
The crying a lot of 49.
Yes,
it is.
Simran Tripathi, good job. Virtual chocolates to you as well.
Crying of the lot 49. That was it. I just kept on. I was about to fill my board.
By Thomas Pynchon.
Thomas Pynchon, is that work? Do we? Okay, so it's 6:59. I'm minding up.
Ritu is like no more drawing.
No more drawing, but we need to focus on Abhilash's lecture now.
Yes, Abhilash sir is there, and I hope you really enjoy this session. Now over to MC.
Thank you for being a responsive audience.
Thank you so much, and bye-bye. We'll share the quiz in the group. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That's really great. It's absolutely fine. And we have active participants as well. And they were enjoying. And that was such an interactive session. Thank you so much, Shivangi Gandhi and Richu, both of you. Yes, thank you all the participants. Thank you so much. Yes. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Sri Priya, Joint Secretary at All India Forum for English Students, Scholars and Trainers. I'm extremely overwhelmed to welcome you all to the lecture on Angst, Pangs and Reconciliations, Embracing Fissured Postmodernism. I welcome our speaker, Mr. Abhilash Kaushik. Welcome, sir. It's my immense pleasure to introduce you all about him. He's from Assam. He's currently the General Secretary of AIFEST. He is a PhD research scholar in the Department of English, Cotton University, Assam. He is the recipient of three gold medals in his Masters from the Department of English, Ames Institutes, Bangalore University in the year 2018. In the same year, he won the IMRF Youth Literary Award in recognition of the consistent superior performance in research in English studies, and has also won the Best Paper Presenter Award in English at National Seminar held at Kolar, Karnataka. He serves as the English Language Advisor and reviewer of numerous journals across the world. And Abhilash sir, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sri Priya ma'am, for your warm words of introduction. It was really kind of you. I'll start my lecture straight away. I have titled my lecture as Angst, Pangs and Reconciliations, because I will be speaking about postmodernism in general. And whenever we talk about the term postmodernism, there is an inherent angst. Inevitably, we find something which is not that serene, which is not that embracing in terms of what we really want to have. So if we observe the entire situation which we are experiencing at this very point, we have a tendency that is gloomy, to be absolutely precise. We have something which is sort of disturbing, if I am to put it plainly, and also sort of not welcoming at times. So there are angst. And in relation to the certain disturbing and also not comforting elements, what we have is pangs around. But then we cannot just let go them away, right? We are to embrace them. We are to sort of welcome them so that we can sustain, so that human lives can sustain precisely. And then in our effort to understand how to reconcile the entire atmosphere of not having to do with our own ideologies, what I really feel is that the only option left in front of human beings as such is that we are to embrace it. We all know postmodernism is absolutely broken. It is absolutely fragmented. It is fissured. But then, do we have an option in front of us? Do we really have an option? No, we don't. We really don't have an option but to embrace it, but to sort of welcome it in order to understand that, okay, fine, it is how it is. And the word postmodern or the term postmodern is absolutely abstract, to put it in a precise manner. And the abstractedness of this very term is really staggering, because it is called in a situation of whirlpool, you know. The abstractness of this very term is caught in a situation of whirlpool for most individuals across the globe. The simple reason behind the fact is that we just cannot grasp the word postmodern in terms of its ideas. No, we can't. Can we pinpoint it specifically in terms of an idea? No. Also, it is absolutely not possible to compartmentalize it in terms of specific characteristics, because it does not have one single characteristic. And secondly, it is also a tedious task in order to segregate it from the preceding modern era, or the preceding modernism, as we call it. So what we have in front of us is a statement, rather, which is absolutely cynical. It might sound cynical, that postmodernism, when it emerged to this very literary arena, sort of made its appearance felt by disrupting the previously reputed ideas or by previously established norms. That is how we can have a benchmark or have a sort of foundational idea in order to just help ourselves, you know, in order to have something in front of us. Okay, fine, this is how it is, this is how it appeared, and this is how it is establishing itself to be something different. I will come back to my main idea of angst and pangs later on, but initially, to begin with, what I am really interested in is to sort of understand how there are positions which we as individuals should take in this very postmodern world in order to understand our own identity, in order to understand our own positions. You all have heard our previous speaker, Sayan Dey, spoke about self. And in our very process to understand this idea of self, what we really need to do is to understand the postmodern thought. And if an individual makes an attempt to understand how postmodernism in general appears to be something different, appears to be something unique, then we are to understand the fact that there is a shift, there is a glaring shift. It is an absolutely thin line, albeit subtle as well. But then this shift sort of marks the difference of the organic whole, which we had absolutely experienced during our time period related to modernism. If we consider this as our basic platform to be relying on, then we can see that it is the entire shift from the preceding age that needs to be taken into account, that needs to be focused on, because there were paradox and contradictions on one side, and then secondly, on the other side, these two ideas are coupled with negotiations and deliberations which reign supreme in order to understand the entire essence of postmodernism. Having said that, we can also say that it is an absolutely safe statement to make, if there is any, that the emergence of the entire process of postmodernism can be taken into account to be a counter idea, you know. It is an idea which is an absolute counter idea to the previously asserted idea in the postmodern domain. This is how we can sort of attribute ourselves in order to have a specific position, because we as human beings need a specific position. Now then, whenever we talk about any movement for that matter, any literary theory for that matter, any cultural movement for that matter, we always want to have a specific date. we always want to have a specific time period. Now, and every literary movement has it for that matter. There is a clear demarcation for that, but in English literature, we just cannot really specify one specific date for any movement or any cultural theory, because one particular theory tends to override the other. And this attribute of the entire scenario of English literature becomes absolutely glaring when we study postmodernism. This is how it appears to be. And if we are to date modernism, then we can simply say that more or less it is something that has coincided with the two great wars, if we are to find out something concrete, or precisely something like the end of the wars, end of the Great World Wars. And then one safe date, if we are to find something specific to put forward, is that modernism, in the sense, appeared during the beginning of the 20th century, if we are to establish a position as individuals. And then regarding postmodernism, it can be safely said that it appeared towards the end, or rather towards the back end of the 20th century, in order to have something concrete. Now then, okay, fine, we have two positions, we have two specific ideas associated, but then these ideas again need to be precisely demarcated, because you just cannot say that modernism began after the end of the wars. Is there anything specific? Is there anything concrete? Now, to understand this, one specific remark which was made by Ihab Hassan that had stayed with me for a long time now, for a very long time now. Ihab Hassan has made an absolutely precise and succinct distinction, between the two. He says that they both are enemies. And the word enemy has struck my mind in an absolutely pinpoint manner, in an absolutely straightforward manner. Ihab Hassan says that whenever we are to study the period of postmodernism and modernism in reconciliation with the general atmosphere, we are to find that postmodernism is awkward. This is what he says, that postmodernism is absolutely uncouth. He uses such words. The reason being that he argues that there is an attempt by the postmodern thinkers in order to surpass or rather suppress the movement in itself. So there is an enemy which is within the entire framework of understanding. Thus, the terms contains an enemy within is what Ihab Hassan remarks. And this statement is absolutely staggering because it talks about an enemy in terms of understanding something which is societal, which is cultural, which is at times political as well. So we have a position, okay, nonetheless we have a position. But this position is also difficult in order to understand the basic ideas, because there were a lot of attempts made by philosophers, made by key practitioners in order to comprehend the two, in order to understand the basic ideological divisions, in order to understand the main tenets of the two atmospheric ideas. And one of the reasons for the thinkers in order to reframe their own ideas, which I believe was that there was an absolute idea of progress that dominated the initial phase of modernism. It was progress that reigned supreme. It was the idea of development that reigned absolutely supreme when the atmosphere of modernism was engulfing the entire scenario, entire literary arena. And the key idea of modernism in relation to progress was also having the simultaneous availability of the idea of science. And whenever we talk about the idea of science, we will also have to bring in the idea of rationality. So on one side, we have truth, we have the rational aspect, we have the ideological divisions, and on the other side, we have its contradictory position in terms of postmodernism. And there were also certain ideas of truth that remain uncontested because postmodernism, or rather modernism beforehand, always epitomized something which is true. And truth, as we all know, always remains uncontested. You just don't question, you just don't pinpoint something to be wrong in terms of truth, in terms of something which is generally accepted to be true in a society. So considering postmodernism, what we have is that there was the period or there was the scenario in the literary field that sort of entertained the idea that we really don't know at this very point. Now, this present point of understanding, the period which we live in now, we all call it postmodern, but is it really postmodern? This is what I am interested in knowing. Is it really postmodern? Because the other day I was reading an article and I found many arguments, or rather many counter arguments, saying that the period which we live in now is not postmodern, but something which can be called as metamodern. This is a term which can be applied to the present day scenario. It is metamodern instead of postmodern. And this idea of metamodern sort of rests on this basic excitement of rationality of the moderns and the irony of the postmoderns. So it is a sway between the two. It sort of oscillates between the two. And in its oscillation, what it does is that it tries to establish itself, and that attempt in order to establish a position is what makes postmodern scenario in general really, really important. Because whenever we talk about an idea or whenever we talk about a theorist for that matter, we'll have to take into account of the fact that there is a ideological division, there is a position, and there is some kind of fallback. You will have to have something in your mind in order to speak, or in order to know something, or in order to write something. There has to be that tendency in order to lean on. There has to be that sort of benchmark, that sort of understanding in order to comprehend the fact that, okay, fine, this is what I am interested in. Okay, fine, this is what I want to say. And for you to say something, there has to be that borderline, or there has to be that knowledge in you, which sort of transpires into your words. And in our process to understand postmodernism, this is how things got started, which can be said to be the fag end of the 20th century. And then there are many critics we all know who have tremendously criticized the entire theoretical paradigm of postmodernism. There are a lot of critics, we all know them, right? They have, in a way, made it very clear that, okay, fine, what we have now is not postmodernism, but something that is beyond the entire scenario of postmoderns. Because at the end of the day, if we are to, in a way, study the postmodern ideas properly, what we have is an absolutely fragmented ideological picture. And this fragmentation is something that is the epitome of our own understanding, of our whole point to understand how something needs to be done. Because fragmentation is not only based on literary text, is not only based on some kind of writing, but the fragmentation is based on the entire society itself. Because the main point is that we have a society, and that is based on some kind of ideological divisions again. And I refer back to this very idea again and again in order to make this point very clear that postmodernism itself is fragile. Now, this might be a very sweeping remark, this might be a very tantalizingly close statement in terms of not keeping, or rather not aligning myself to a safe zone. But then it is the truth. It is something that we really, really need to take into account of the fact that it is what it is, to put it in simple words, to make a sort of rudimentary understanding, And then if we are to refer anyone for that matter who has blatantly criticized the entire scenario, we can always go back to that Canadian critic Linda Hutchin. She is one of the topmost criticizers of this very movement. We all know that her famous text, The Politics of Postmodernity, is a foundational text in this regard. And if we are to make an estimate of her very famous statements in relations to her criticisms, it becomes absolutely clear that the critiques in the literary field, the critiques in the literary world, in the present day structure, have sort of moved away from this understanding of the entire label. So the angst will come in order to make us realize that at the end of the day, we have to embrace the fissured, the broken, the fragmented, the distracted ideas of postmodernism. Linda Hutchin says that, let us just say it's over. in relation to postmodern ideas, in relation to the postmodern period. Let's just say it's over. This is what Linda Hudson argues. And she also says that the postmodern movement has passed. We don't have it. We no longer have it. And postmodernism, according to her, is a very, very kind of feeble kind of a label which we, the human beings, attribute, which the human beings sort of give in order to suit our own purpose. Because as she says, we don't really have a postmodern period. This is how difficult it is. So if we are to make a careful study, we will absolutely make it very clear that the period in relation to the postmodern ideas is a problem in itself. I don't want to problematize the entire problem, but the very fact is that postmodernism itself is not having a strong position in terms of establishing its ideas, in terms of putting forward what it really intends to do. And then Linda Hudson also argues the fact that she concludes by saying that it is for the readers, it is for us, it is for you and me to find out a new label, a new name, so that we can designate this current scenario, designate the current position. So this is how I would love to start my lecture. Okay, and then my main focus of my talk today is to understand something which I deem something really important, which I think that every individual should really have a basic understanding. And my main focus today is to understand the binary. I am more concerned about the ideas in relation to the binary. Now, to assert a very much rudimentary understanding, it can be said that there was an inherent totality, okay? Whenever we consider the ramifications of modernism, there was an absolute idea of totality. There were ideas in relation to idealism. There were ideas in relation to ethics. Ethical questions were absolutely dominant at that point. There was the concept of humanity in relation to individual beings. But then, whenever we make a proper study of the postmodern period, we find that there is a shift. There is an absolutely glaring shift. Now, what is this shift about? This is my main focus. This is my main concern. And this shift is the shift from the totalizing drive of modernity to what becomes the contestation of binaries in the postmodern period. And I believe this is the bottom line of my talk, because I will be focusing on the binary process. I'll be focusing on how the totalizing drive of the preceding modernism gets absolutely nullified when it comes to understanding the contradicting errors and the irony-adorned ideological divisions of the postmodern period. And then we can also say that modernism or modernity as such sort of plays out with the help of the difference, because certain binaries are completely grooved in the modernist paradigm itself. This is how simple and this is how delicate it is. There are binaries, but those binaries sort of get played out in the inherent modernist paradigm. And that is absolutely remarkable when an individual tries to make a proper estimate. Now, whenever I talk about binary, let me make myself very clear. What I essentially mean are the general contradictory ideas which get operated within the broader realm of postmodernism. This is how I define, or rather I'm interested in understanding what binary implies. And in relation to various binaries then, what can be said is that postmodernism is basically contesting those binaries, and it also argues that there are no play within various binaries in the broader realm of postmodern understanding. This is how simply we can understand the fact. Now, talking about binaries, we can, to begin with, say that modernism had closure. It had an end to everything for that matter. It had closure. And on the other hand, what do we have in the postmodern world? We have paradox. Because there is nothing finite, there is nothing fixed. Let me give you an example. Modernism had a unity, right? Let us take the example of the wasteland. Wasteland had absolute unity in terms of religion, in terms of spirituality, and also in terms of human beings at times. Okay, so if we take the example of the wasteland, in order to understand the unity, the idea of unity in relation to modernism, we can also say that this very unity gets absolutely nullified in the postmodern world, because what it does is that unity gets replaced by ambiguity. That is important. Unity gets replaced by ambiguity in the postmodern world. This is how things get played. This is how binaries get contested. And this is how we as postmodern individuals need to understand this fact. And talking about another very important aspect, another very important binary, which I really like, is that modernists' critique always talked about an order, The main proponents of modernism always spoke about an order. They always focused on an organic whole. Let us take the example of Ulysses. Ulysses is something that had sort of epitomized the orderly way of writing, the orderly way of structure. Now then, if we are to speak about order in the modern world, we cannot but speak about the presence of indeterminacy in the postmodern world. So, the order gets replaced by some sort of indeterminacy in the postmodern world, because whenever we talk about the modernist exercise, we find something absolute. There was absolution. And this absolution, or rather something absolute, gets nullified in relation to irony, in relation to the process of indeterminacy in the postmodern world. So these are my ideas as to how we can sort of divide, or rather understand the binaries, because the main focus of my talk is to understand the angst and pangst which are adorning the entire postmodern scenario. And we are to take into account of the fact of all these binaries in order to embrace the Fissured modern postmodern ideas. Because at the end of the day, we are to embrace it because we have been a part of this entire society. We have been a part of this entire structure. And postmodernism, since its very inception, had really accommodated and also celebrated the kind of idea in relation to difference and otherness, Postmodernism celebrates difference like anything. Now, what is this difference all about? The way we deal with postmodernism, it can be said that there is also an indirect, if not direct, relation to popular culture. I'm not going into the depth of popular culture. I'm not going deep into it. But then what I am really interested in understanding the fact that postmodernism does not really believe in anything elite, It does not believe in anything, if we are to say classically, it does not believe in anything, something which is pertaining to the perfection in relation to modernism, because it allows for difference. And whenever we talk about difference, whenever we consider the fact that there is the need to understand something important, there is the essential requirement of the need in order to elaborate ourselves, in order to understand the fact that there are differences, there are ideas which are different, there are ideas which are sort of establishing themselves to be against the modernist ideas. We are to welcome them. We are to give them a space in order to sort of understand, sort of make ourselves known that there are differences, and these differences can really be the building blocks. Because at the end of the day, we are to, again, I'm coming back to my main argument, we are to embrace it. We are to make certain spaces, make certain rooms, make certain positions so that we can have something precise, so that we can have something concrete. Now then, if we are to make a frame of post-modernity, these two words are appearing almost simultaneous manner, almost in a simultaneous manner in our writings, post-modernism and post-modernity. But then how to segregate the two, how to sort of demarcate the two in terms of clear-cut understandings. If we are to make a frame of post-modernism, it can safely be concluded that postmodernism is nothing but the condition. This is what I believe. Postmodernism is the condition itself. It is the culture. It is the philosophy. It is nothing but the societal tendency. Okay, fine. If the societal tendency and culture is postmodernism, postmodernity, what is postmodernism? We can very easily then say postmodernism is nothing but the aesthetics of it, the mechanics of it. It is rather the outcome and the representation of the writings in general. This is how we can safely demarcate the two, safely differentiate between the two. And then in our understandings of how things get classified, of our understandings of how things get in a way properly delineated, we can also say that the postmodern debate is a critical one. It is absolutely critical. The debates which are in a way adorning the entire scenario are absolutely critical. Why is it so? Because we previously have understood modernism to be a failed project, to be an incomplete project. We all know the famous line, modernism is an incomplete project. But is it really so? This is my question. Is it really so? If modernism was a failed project, how are we still continuing? Because postmodernism can really be understood as an extension of the modernist era, rather than the result or the counterattack to it. So if we don't consider it to be a failed project, we can safely say that postmodernism is itself in something that took the idea from modernism, because many postmodern critics, practitioners, theorists, and writers considered the essential paradigm of modernism to be their base, to be their stranglehold, to be their leaning pillar in order to frame their own theoretical positions. In relation to the current scenario, in relation to the present day nature, postmodernism today becomes the new theoretical proposition of the hour. This is how important it is. It becomes the new proposition of the hour. Why is it so? Why is it happening? Because in terms of literature and culture, in terms of a world that looks ahead at the environment, in terms of a world that looks ahead at the critical, at the social, at the material, cultural forces, we tend to figure out the basic ideas which are associated with it. We tend to figure out the historical conditions which are associated with it. And also we tend to sort of idealize ourselves in relation to a certain position. And then whenever I talk about idealizing ourselves, or whenever I talk about the histories, the smaller portions of histories in general, the name which is really important, which we absolutely take into consideration, is Jean-Francois Lyotard. Because we all know, I'm not going depth into his arguments, Lyotard vehemently criticizes the presence of narrative. He has absolutely made it clear that there is the death of the grand narrative in the postmodern world. And he calls it the incredulity towards meta-narratives. We all know that, we all have read it, we all have taught it to our students. But what I am interested in knowing is that if we are to consider the fact that there are no grand narratives, there are no grand truth, then we will have to take into account of this idea that there is the presence of smaller fragmented ideas. There is the presence of smaller narratives, because postmodernism embraces plurality. And this plurality will be embraced, will be taken into consideration only when we nullify grand truth. This is how it is. Only when we nullify, or rather negate, the presence of ideas. Now, this again might something really cynical, you know, because the idea which I am really interested in is how the presence of smaller narratives result in embracing plurality, or rather results in embracing an environment which is democratically plural. This is what my concern is. And the arguments by Lyotard, in a way, challenge all the propositions in relation to meta-narrative. Because the ideas pertaining to meta-narrative always believed in truth, always believed in something fixed, always believed in something whole, something grand. But if we are to negate the presence of the grand narrative, we also at the same time will have to take into consider the fact that there is a challenge. There is an absolute challenge which is getting positioned by this very statement itself. So this statement is itself a double-edged sword. This is how it appears to be. And then it results in smaller histories. This is how simply can be understood. Because okay, fine, we don't have any absolute reality. We don't have any kind of grand sort of theory. But then there are the ideas which will make us understand that the characteristics which are associated with postmodernism are always smaller in terms of their attribute. Now we can quote Paul Ricoeur for that matter, hermeneutics of suspicion. We all know this famous phrase. Now, okay, fine. If we are to sort of understand hermeneutics of suspicion, we will also have to take into account the fact that the suspicion itself is suspicious of its entire presence. The suspicion which we have in front of us in the postmodern world is itself suspicious as to how it posits itself in a world which is fragmented, in a world which is dominated by unreliable narrators, unreliable sort of readers at times, because whenever we read a book, if there is an unreliable narrator, we sort of deviate ourselves from what is going on. Let us take the example of writers like Kazuo Ishiguro. If you have read the novels by Kazuo Ishiguro, you will absolutely agree with me that there are narrators, most of them, who are, if I am to put it in simple words, who are misleading, who are unreliable. You just cannot trust them. And in this very position, the entire scenario of hermeneutics of suspicion gets dismantled itself. This is how staggering, this is how blatant it can be in terms of our own ideas. But then we will also have to consider the fact that the text which is in front of us becomes an illusion in itself. It is nothing but something which is illusory, which is having the idea, which is having the nature in terms of not concretizing itself to be one specific whole, but making ways and giving rooms and spaces to the ideas which are absolutely necessary in terms of making a reader, in terms of making every reader for that matter realize that this is what it is. This is how a thing, a text, a particular writing needs to be understood. This is how we can safely immerse out of this entire whirlpool, because like I said in the very beginning, that the understanding of the word postmodern for most of the readers is a situation which is getting caught in a whirlpool because you just cannot come out of it. And in relation to the various debates which we have in the postmodern field, we can then, after Lyotard, we can then say that the entire scenario or the entire theoretical proposition looks ahead in terms of having smaller narratives, looks ahead in terms of having smaller identities, narratives, histories, because at the end of the day, there has to be something which will keep the movement going. There has to be something which will keep the movement intact and in place. Now, the idea in relation to the death of the grand narrative can be argued to be something really, really inherent in one another, you know. What I really believe is that there is that attribute of human science itself. If we establish ourselves to be thinkers, if we establish ourselves to be someone who is deeply into it, we will absolutely find the fact that whenever there is an essential understanding of this entire scenario, we'll find that the statement made by Lyotard had a phenomenological aspect into it, the study of phenomenology. And whenever we talk about phenomenology, we will have to bring in the names of two very, very important proponents, Hegel and Heidegger. These two theorists, these two philosophers for that matter, what I am interested in, what I am really, really, really looking forward to is the main idea of the study of human science itself. Because the two proponents which I just mentioned sort of made it very clear that there was a philosophical underpinning in the very famous statement made by Lyotard. And one more thing that is staggering, that is absolutely clear as well. Lyotard himself was a phenomenologist. So it can safely be said that what he was more interested in was the production of knowledge, was what knowledge itself was, or how knowledge can be processed. These three things we have to take into consideration if we are to understand postmodernism in thorough detail. This is how it appears to be. Because the idea of knowledge, because the idea of how the knowledge or how something gets processed is again pertaining to the behavior of human science, which is nothing but phenomenology, which is nothing but something philosophical in its attribute, in its ramifications, in its underpinnings. So we have something blatantly said, we have something which is being given to us, but then there are leaning pillars, but then there are, like I previously said, there has to be something for you to lean on, for you to say something. You just cannot blatantly remark something, right? You just cannot speak up your mind without having a strong kind of support, without having a strong base to it. So the statement which was made by Lyotard had this support of phenomenology itself, because at the end of the day, at the end of his own understanding, it can be very safely said that there was the idea that was dominated by the entire study in relation to human science. And basically, their period in relation to the emergence of postmodernism had a lot of troubles. The 60s, 70s, 80s, and 50s even had absolute periodical divisions which sort of negated the entire idea of truth that was earlier present and that was earlier dominant as well. And this is one of the major thoughts of the 70s and the 80s precisely, which have laid the foundation for the very core of the postmodern understanding. And what I'm, to be very honest, what I'm really looking forward to knowing in my future days is, although there is a belief, there is a disbelief for the matter towards the very idea of meta-narrative, can we then not say this very division of meta-narratives created two different worlds? This is my absolute personal understanding and personal viewpoint. Whenever there is the dismantling of the idea of the meta-narrative, what we have is on the other side, the creation of two different worlds. Number one, the world of the big narrative and the world of the small narrative. In one sense, if we make a critical study, we can come to the conclusion that there was the idea of knowledge creation, new knowledge for that matter, and the new condition of the postmodern. And on the other hand, this very statement was again establishing a certain kind of binary. And this is my main concern, to understand the binary, because like I earlier said, the main focus of my talk is to understand the shift from the totalizing drive of modernism to what becomes the contestation of binary in the postmodern world. So this is my main sort of takeaway in my understanding, in my readings. And then at times it can also be said that if there was the rejection of one world, of the grand world, there was the act of embracing the smaller world. There is again the binary position. If you are rejecting the greater world, you are embracing the smaller world, which will imply the fact that postmodernism celebrates differences to a great extent. Postmodernism celebrates the idea of democratic pluralism to an absolute larger degree, to an absolute great extent. And this is when the idea of meta-narratives become really important to the entire understanding of the postmodern scenario, because meta-narratives are the driving forces. And it is then again the remark that meta-narrative or the meta-modernism for that matter are the two key essential steps, essential coins in this present world. This is how structurally we can organize the same. Meta-narrative then in this regard becomes the grand theory in the present era. It will become the theoretical paradigm or the theoretical sort of position for the human beings, for the critics, for the practitioners, in order to have something concrete, in order to have something to lean on. Because for you to understand how the differences get played, there has to be something concrete in the first place, so that we don't get caught, so that we don't get sort of engulfed in an atmosphere where we are lost, where we are absolutely clueless. And talking about meta-narrative, we will also have to take into account of the fact that during the initial periods, let us take the example of the Renaissance, of the period of Renaissance itself, the ideas associated with Christianity, the ideas associated with Marxism for that matter, those ideas were absolutely stalwarts, those ideas were considered to be the basic platforms. They were the grand theories of the Western world that nobody could refute. There was no sort of fingers being pointed at them. They were the absolute theories. No one could refute them. No one could reject them. But then in the current scenario, what we have is a rejection of grand truth. And then the idea of progress, which modernism greatly epitomized, sort of transpired into the presence of meta-narrative in the present era. Now, I spoke a few minutes earlier in relation to the turbulent period which the Western world suffered from in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s for that matter. Now, how to differentiate that? If we consider the period of the 60s, we can say that there was a very important idea, the idea of the heroic West, the idea in relation to heroism, the ideas associated with nobleness, being noble, the ideas associated with great virtues, the ideas associated with science and progress. All those ideas sort of became the directives of the present day world at that very point. But after the end of the 1950s, let us assume the date, after the end of the 1950s, after the end of the Second World War for that matter, which is an absolutely apocalyptic moment in history, we all know that, the end of the Second World War, we can say that the idea of heroism of individual collapsed. There was no longer the presence of the idea of heroism, which dominated the entire Western world initially. And this collapse is something from which the present day postmodern world could never really recover. And this point is absolutely important if we are to understand the angst and the pangs which embrace the postmodern world. Why is it happening? And how to reconcile it? How to sort of, that is fine, staggering, that is so much. Now let's come and lead a good life. How to sort of attain such a position, how to sort of have it in front of us in a peaceful and serene manner. And to do that, we can again say that the utter collapse of heroism in complete totality is something from which the ramification got flowered, from which the ramification sort of entangled in its own wave. And the safe conclusion in this regard is that the devastation of the Second World War was so huge, so humongous, that it ruined the entire backbone of the Western world, to put it in a safe way. And then what we can also say is that there was the emergence of amalgamations, there was the emergence of some kind of ideas that gave way to postmodernism. And in this regard, I suddenly it came to my mind, there was a very famous statement made by Hans Brentens, if I'm not wrong. Hans Brentens, he said that postmodernism means and has meant so many things. It means and has meant so many things. And it is surprising, because initially he says that it was only a humble critical origin that originated in the 1950s. This is what Hans Brentens argues. Postmodernism initially was just a humble origin that came to the scene in the 1950s, but now in the 1980s, 1990s, it has become a global concept. So we have a change in meaning. This is what I am focusing on. We have a change in meaning now at this very point. What we have is that it has, from its own beginning point, to be something really simple, to be really mundane, what we have at present is a global idea, is a global conceptualized view of this basic identity. And Hans Brentens makes it very clear, makes this idea absolutely clear. And then by the 1950s, if we are to consider something specific, there was the emergence and also there was the development of certain countercultures, if I am not wrong. In the West, by the 1950s, there was the development of the civil rights movements. And then we can also find that there was the emergence of something which is really, really close to me. There was the emergence of the Beat generations, the hippie cultures. I absolutely love Allen Ginsberg. I absolutely love Jack Kerouac's On the Way. I have read Howl, and Howl is absolutely staggering because it denotes the entire position, the entire fallback as to how there was the counterculture position. There was the culture, there was the emergence of something new that is important in order to understand the fact that there is a binary position. And these countercultures are nothing but binary positions, which individuals or which writers at that very point took it up in order to make it very clear. And then all those ideas in relation to how things can be understood, we can also say that these ideas were countercultures to the entire idea of heroism, entire idea of rationality, entire idea of logical reasoning, entire idea of the Enlightenment premise, which dominated the earlier available theoretical paradigms, earlier available theoretical periods. So we have binary positions, we also have contrasting ideas, but then these are the ideas that sort of make postmodernism, that sort of make postmodernism stand out in a world which is fragmented, in a world which is broken, in a world which is fissured. And then to further strengthen the claim as to why I am focusing on the dislike towards meta-narrative, I can also bring in the example of the emergence of the cult, emergence of a major cultural disturbance, emergence of something that is really, really important in understanding how things got changed. It was the gypsy cult, who are also called as the flower children. You all know it. The emergence of the flower children or the gypsy cult is again a very interesting counterculture that contributed to the turbulent changes which sort of adorned and engulfed the entire atmosphere. And let me put it straight away, it was very difficult to cope with, because coping with the entire sudden changes after the devastations of the World War sort of initiated postmodernism, but also at the same time dismantled the previously seen fixed, concrete, organic positions that were no longer to be found. Now, to put it in simple words, if 50s was a challenge to Western heroism, the 60s again witnessed the civil rights movement along with the emergence of the Beat generation. And then how can we forget the 70s, which was the culmination of Vietnam in the form of the Indo-Western War? So we have the 50s, 60s, 70s, which were absolutely turbulent period in the form of emergence of civil rights movements, Beat generation, the hippie culture, and the culmination of Vietnam in the form of Indo-Western War. So these are some kind of benchmark, some kind of tools leaning on which we can understand postmodernism as to how different it was, as to how important it was, and also as to how it established itself to be an idea that needs proper understanding, that needs proper elucidation, so that we can get to know it better. And then all the values that were built earlier sort of got dismantled, got demolished, and then there was the emerging trends of counterculture. Now, at this very juncture, what we have is that human world got positioned in the middle of a modern world, which truly marks its exist from the preceding postmodern or the modern world. So the entire world is itself in a whirlpool coming out from which is absolutely difficult. We just cannot come out from it because there are fangs. I refer to angst and pangs initially in my lecture, but then there are fangs as well, which will catch you, which will hold you properly in order to make you realize that no, you just cannot go away from it. This is how difficult it is. Now, in relation to modernism, there is a very important understanding, by it, the understanding was put forward by Silvio Gaggi. And the lines which the person said, the critic said, those lines are staggering because the lines are not definition. People generally define a movement, right? But the lines put forward by Silvio Gaggi describes the position of postmodernism. And that description is interesting because not often do you find something which will describe a position. There are definitions everywhere, but to describe a position, that is really important. Now, what does Silvio Gaggi say? He says that often the modern period is used to refer to the entire epoch that is associated with the Western culture, Western civilization. And if we are to consider a bottom line, let us consider the Renaissance, since the Renaissance, something like that. Now, postmodernism, in this sense, he argues that is not something simply that follows the earlier 20th century culture, but which follows the entire humanist tradition. This is absolutely interesting because he says that it follows the entire humanist tradition, which is a central component and also culture of the modern period. This is how it is. This is how the position of postmodern understanding gets defined. And the creation of this very new designation suggests that in some way the postmodern world is different of the modern world. Because in order to understand its own position, what we need to do is to understand the fact how different it is from the preceding era, how different it is from the periods that have gone by. And Silvio Gaggi made it very clear that it is not the understanding of the simple humanist tradition, but the entire aspect of humanity starting from the Renaissance. This is how he simply positions it. And then if we are to establish the present day understanding of the postmodern scenario, we cannot deny the fact that there is a tug of war in place. There are numerous wars going on. We all know about the theory wars, right? There are a lot of wars in relation to theory going on. But then we also have to consider the fact that there is a tug of war going on in relation to different critiques, in relation to different practitioners, in relation to different theorists putting forward their ideas. And in relation to modernism, how can we then precisely bring in something? How can we then consider something to be the focal point? Let us consider the statement by the phrase by Ezra Pound, make it new. We all have studied it numerous times, make it new by Ezra Pound. Making it new by the modern critics or the modern writers, we can easily say it could have well laid the foundation, laid the background. But there are a certain group of people who might really be offended with the very idea that modernism has nothing to do with the postmodern world, because postmodernism can be argued to be the continuation of the earlier modernism. This is how both are connected again. Okay, and then in our understanding, I would love to bring the remark made by Stephen Connor. What does Stephen Connor say? Stephen Connor argues that it is only with the help of developments that we can understand postmodernism. And he talks about three important critiques that sort of help us to understand how postmodernism established itself to be something different. And he says that there were developments going on different fronts. Initially, there was the aspect in relation to society, which was taken care of by Jean Baudrillard. After that, we find Lyotard, who was sort of formulating his views on the idea in relation to meta-narratives. And then later on, we have Ihab Hassan, who was creating a new kind of sensibility in relation to post-war writing. So Baudrillard, Ihab Hassan, Jean-Francois Lyotard, these three persons, according to Stephen Connor, are the sort of benchmark which have tried to depict the fact that there were developments, that were earlier not seen, that were initially not present. And this is how postmodern understanding of writings, postmodern understanding of society can take place. And this statement by Stephen Connor is interesting in relation to, again, the position. Because afterward, there has to be some kind of concretization of our own understanding in relation to individual identity, in relation to individual aspect of knowledge. And the French sociologist Jean Baudrillard, we have studied him numerous times, right? He was a Marxist, we all know it, right? And then being a Marxist, what I am really concerned about is that he says that we live in a world of commodification, Baudrillard. And according to him, the world which we live in now is surrounded by all kind of networks. Now, this statement, every time I read it, makes me think, because it is not true. In the sense, although he is a Marxist, this statement appears to be anti-foundationalist. Just think for a while. The world is surrounded by a network of all sorts of commodification, and we live in a world of communication. This is what Baudrillard says. We all have read it numerous times, multiple times. But isn't the statement is anti-foundational? There can be answers to it, there can be arguments, there can be discussions, deliberations to it. But then I strongly believe that considering this very phrase, what we have is that we are living in a world that is rooted in a grand technological universe then at this very point. Okay, fine. We live in a world of communication. Let us give some respect to Baudrillard and just assume the fact that, and just accept the fact that we are living in a technological world. But then this statement is itself anti-foundationalist. And then, okay, fine, we'll have to accept the argument that the period which we live in at this very point is rooted in a grand technological universe. And to substantiate this, we can also say that we are irretrievably and irreversibly connected to cultural boom of technology. And this presence of the cultural boom of technology is the fangs which are sort of engulfing the human world in order to deviate themselves from the angst and pangs which we have on the other side, because human world today is again fragmented, is again broken. And then I use the term anti-foundationalist, and to make it very clear, I have again an understanding which you all know. If we are to believe in the Foucauldian world, Michel Foucault, if we are to believe in his world, then we can safely say that there is a constant surveillance going on, and we are always under the scanner. We are getting observed, we are getting monitored. This is what Foucault argues. And Baudrillard, echoing Foucault, says that we have moved away, we have come away, we have moved away from the world of person-to-person communication and have come to networks. And those networks are absolutely interesting, absolutely remarkable in our positions of understanding. And then if we are to study the theory itself, if we are to make a proper understanding of our own idea, it can be said that everything which is physical, everything that can be attributed to the physical matrix has deviated itself to an electronic matrix, which we call, or rather Baudrillard calls, simulacra. I'm not going into the details of these ideas because these ideas are absolutely mundane and we have read it numerous times. But what I am interested in is the fact that there are numerous signs and significations which are going around, and people are getting caught in the wave. It is the wave of signification. And we'll also have to state the fact that we never consume an object in itself. Do we? That's the point. We never consume an object in itself in relation to its use value, and we sort of manipulate the objects as signs in its broadest sense. So objects become signs, or rather objects get transformed into signs. Now, one of the ways in which we can challenge this entire postmodern period, or how postmodernism challenges the older notions of the world of social reality, we can say that the period after the modernism as such is now being recognized as a new kind of flatness, because the formal feature of modernism is no longer present, is no longer to be seen. And it also begins to look at how the idea of the organic truth is no longer viable. This is also interesting. And how everyone, instead of something grand, is looking at the very little histories, the fissured histories. And these little histories, therefore, admit or rather announce the arrival of something plural, something that is democratic plural, like I said earlier. And in our own understanding, this very process of ideas in relation to elitism, high culture, popular culture, high modernism, all these ideas get refuted, that get blatantly refuted, and the broader whole of postmodernism, we can say that there is a stress. There is a stress on the notion of plural history, which again gets evidenced by the availability of different modes of representation within the same framework in literary writings. Whenever we read a novel, what do you find? There are enormously different ways and means of making a thing appear in front of us. Now, this representation can really take shape in relation to the presence of something plural, in relation to the presence of something not single, something not organic. And the ideas which are coming forward, which are coming later on during the later period, later days, are again very well substantiating the fact that we are no longer having something concrete. Let me talk about Friedrich Jamison for that matter. Friedrich Jamison's Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism or Postmodernism, that text is an absolutely standout text for us to understand how human beings during this very period have moved away from the entire system of economics, from the entire economic system. And okay, fine, we all know that Jamison has made his arguments in relation from the perspective of the left. So from a left perspective, what we have is that postmodernism becomes some sort of apologetic movement, it sort of apologizes. And also it is an inadequate discourse then if we are to consider Jamison, if we are to consider his arguments. And we can say that during this very period, if we read his book, we will find that he makes it very clear that after the heyday of modernism, people are removed from the economic system. We are no longer there. Now, what did we have during the early capitalism? During the period of early capitalism, people were sort of involved in the economics of society. It's very true. What did we have during high capitalism? During high capitalism, people were completely removed from the working class. There were differences. There were some kind of demarcations. There were some kind of categorization. But now, from the postmodern world, during the postmodern ideas, what we have is that we are completely removed from the economic system. And this view is absolutely Marxist. Let me make it very clear. It is an absolutely Marxist view. What then we can say, we as readers can say, is that the people of the postmodern period are not bothered by the economic system. Do we care? Do we really care? No, we don't. Because we are no longer involving ourselves within the entire economics of it, within the entire representations of it, within the entire understandings of it. And then it can, without any reluctance, be safely concluded by saying that the entire economic system of the postmodern understanding has become flat. There is a great flattening of it. Okay. And The understanding in relation to flattening can also be taken into account in relation to the ways of postmodern living in general, because it is absolutely a no-brainer to comprehend the fact that capitalism is no longer a single entity. That needs to be considered. There are people with different sources of income, there are people with different sources of living, and the general society tends to indicate that some people at this very point can be said to be very rich, while some have been somehow subsumed by the entire system of economy. There are absolutely rich people, but then there are also certain category of people who are knowingly or unknowingly getting subsumed by the entire system, by the entire economics of this very system. Okay, then plainly put, if we are to understand in a rudimentary manner, in a simple common day manner, we can say that the period beyond the golden days of the influence of modernist movement, we have something that is the third stage of capitalism, that is the last part of the third stage of capitalism. I'm not referring back to Jameson, but what we have is that the postmodern condition is a logic, referring back to his book. He says that it is a logic that runs on late capitalism. Very true. And then we can also make the argument that everything in the postmodern world, including postmodernity, works as a force field. Just think for a while, isn't it true? Everything becomes a force field in which different kinds of cultural impulses must make their way. There has to be a way made for the impulses to come in, to pitch in, to creep in. There is this new kind of flatness, as argued by all sorts of critiques, that is absolutely superficial. Do we really understand this flatness? No, we don't. And this superficial idea sort of prevent us from understanding the fact that how the rich and the poor are getting divided. And we can then say that both the categories of a society are ignorant of the entire economy itself, are ignorant of the entire system dealing with economics. Do we really understand the economy? Do we really understand the intricacies, the ramifications, the parts, the offshoots, the branches of our economic system? I'm sure not everyone understands it thoroughly and properly. We just remain on the surface of an economy, and this surface where we remain is Marxist. The surface where we remain, where we stay, where we live in is absolutely Marxist. And in order to understand this very idea of postmodernism, we again have to refer back to history, where Jameson again makes it very clear that the present historical period has forgotten how to think historically in the first place. Ridiculously put, our period has forgotten to think historically in the first place because it either expresses some kind of irrepressible desire or rather effectively suppresses and represses it. This is how we are having some kind of understanding. And then we can also talk about social media. We can also bring in the idea that the postmodern period sort of gives us the picture where people have become the product of social media. And in relation to this, we can say the very fact that there is a loss of unique and separate individual identity. And it pervades and engulfs the entire atmosphere. There is the loss of memory, to be precise. There is the loss of single self, to be absolutely concrete and specific. If we observe carefully, we'll find that we live in here and now. I'm sure you will all agree with me. We all live in here and now. These are the two words that have been associating entire human structure of this very period, here and now. Talking about text as well, it can be said that there is fragmentation, there is non-linear plot, there is unreliable narrator. All these clearly showcase the ongoing process of obliterating differences. We no longer sort of encourage one whole and one concrete identity, but it greatly obliterates difference. And that is really, really, really interesting. In short, if we are to sum it up, we can see that a sort of collage has been made, and this collage depicts the idea that there is no individuality which is remaining in the picture. And the entire idea of fragmentation gets swarmed in. It gets populated. Who is populating it? It is getting populated by a global culture of capitalism, because there is the replication of a chain of global capitalism. This is what is happening. And we, in this very period of the global world, of the so-called global world, try to obliterate the differences. And then we can also say, it is really interesting, and then we can also say that this is basically counter to the main principle of the period after modernism, isn't it? It is a counter in itself, because postmodernism in general is supposed to accommodate differences, embrace plurality, and also attract diversity. So again, we have a position which is binary. And then in relation to fragmentation, we can say that the collage which we have in front of us makes us realize the fact that we don't have any kind of unique personality. We don't have any kind of unique sort of identity. And then we, the postmodern beings, become blurred within this very collage. We are getting suppressed. We are getting buttered together because there is a blurring of identity. And we very much need a cure for this fragmentation, and till now we don't have it, because it is still a process undergo and is a work in progress. And this fragmentation is basically enveloped by a global culture of capitalism. This is what we need to understand. And in this regard, what we have is that the postmodern period replicate the ideas of global flows. There are flows in relation to fast food. I'm not referring to scripts by Anna Padurai. I'm not referring to them. But I'm interested in understanding the global flows which are getting transformed with the help of fast food, with the help of global stores, with the help of theme parks, and also with the help of shopping malls, social media. So all these are in a way helping us realize the fact that there is the process of simulation. There is the process of a chain which is getting developed. And therefore, every form is under the clutch of this very much culture, which is absolutely materialistic in nature. We have to understand this. It is a culture which is absolutely materialistic. And then what is really striking in relation to the importance of this very period after the influence of modernism as such is that postmodernism allows us to experience various representations which make us realize that the postmodern culture is one of democratic pluralism, like I said earlier. And it allows various small discourses to exist and also coexist in a simultaneous manner. This is what we need to understand. And in order to combat the modernist anxiety, which we had earlier, we must assume the fact that the postmoderns begin to be guided by late capitalism logic. And it is the logic to go with the people, to flow with the wave. Do we have an option? In a nutshell, to sum up the entire idea, what I really want to understand the fact is that postmodernism very nonchalantly, nullifies the very hope of answer. Do we really have an answer? It nullifies the entire hope. It nullifies the hope of not having an answer in the form of a single answer. It vehemently rejects the idea that there is a singular concept. And this is remarkable because the singular concept which can be applied to the entire universe is not present in the postmodern scenario. As a result of the earlier principles which prevailed during the modern period, there was a sheer collapse, and it was the collapse of reason. Like I said earlier, it was the collapse of enlightenment. And those ideas sort of made people understand that the postmodern world is different, and postmodernity stormed into the scene in the sense of its history. in the sense of the history of losing the stable and the rational world of human beings in relation to the coming of wars. So, therefore, the numerous countercultures, therefore, the numerous countercultural attacks in the 50s and 60s, like I mentioned a few minutes earlier, those sort of laid the platform, those sort of helped us understand that how these things are available in front of us. The protest against the Vietnam, the civil riots, the Beat generation, the hippie culture, these can be very rightly considered to be the building blocks after the period of modernism. So the narrative of progress that is challenged emerges as one of the major ideas in the exercise of this very modernist idea and thought. This is important if we are to understand our own position. In this regard, it also becomes absolutely imperative to state that the basic premise of this period of modernism basically rests on its failure. It is surprising, but then it is pretty evident as well. The basic foundation of its rests in its failure. The moral, the philosophical, the scientific sort of challenges that arrive to the emergence of conflicting micro-narrative in the present-day world thereby indicate playful engagement with the earlier ideas. And we can absolutely understand these in order to, by taking into account of the fact that there are ideas and these ideas are making people know, making people understand that at the end of the day, these are the ideas which will make the postmodern world run and run and run again and again. And the period beyond the influence of modernism essentially therefore looks at the rejection of that world. Postmodernism, we, the people of the postmodern world, we look at the rejection of this world. It was a rejection of the world that would have been erected by eminent thinkers like Freud, for that matter, like Kant, Immanuel Kant, for that matter, Marx, Karl Marx, for that matter. So we can have this entire picture, what becomes also a statement in hindsight, that the philosophical and the ideological angles of all the developments of all the contradictory ideas sort of fail to deliver its promise in relation to modernism. This is where again we can bring in the idea of Lyotard. And then we can also take into account of the fact that there are many arguments where it was stated that moderns don't follow the moderns per se. So we have written down records as well, as evidenced by numerous records. Let us take the example of Lyotard for the matter. Moderns were always contained in the postmodern themselves. It is a very succinct remark, and it also brings to limelight the oppositions, the ideas between the moderns and the postmodern cities. And then to understand how we as individuals need to take into account of the entire position, we can say that the questioning of the phenomenon of the entire horizon of universalization in this post-modern world, we find a place that is really, really, really significant. The reason being that the general emancipations of any kind never really find a place before the eyes in the postmodern man. We don't have it. Do you have a general emancipation? No, blatant no. And then the disappearance of the ideas in relation to the progress, in relation to freedom, would surely explain a certain mode. It would also explain a certain tone, a style, something different, something which is not present, which is not glaringly seen, and which is specific to postmodernism. Now, all this proposition again properly get validated by the very fact that postmodernism well and truly allows different kinds of language games. And these language games to be played within its realm is again one of the foundational ideas which will sustain the entire developments in relation to postmodernism. And then we can also say that the postmodern world teases words into meanings. This is how it establishes itself. It teases words into meanings. It seeks alternatives. We always look for alternatives, right? This again marked the advent of numerous mixtures and ways of bringing in certain kinds of alternatives in general, just as the truth of science. because there is also the debate that science is also subject to a lot of suspicion. So both the angles are under scanner, if we are to bring in the terminology by Foucault. And then thus the validation by the society comes into strengthen postmodernism. And to sum it up, I would like to state that the validation which I am focusing on, the validation which I am really interested on, will be made by the society, will be made by us, and it will help postmodernism sustain, it will help postmodernism embrace in itself. There will be angst, there will be fangs, but then we will have to take into account of the process of reconciliation. And it will be a validation which I strongly believe that it will be supreme in its structure, it will be nonchalant in its approach, and it will be vicious in its aura. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I would love to listen to your thoughts, your reflections, your questions, your comments, everything. Shripriya ma'am, you can take over now.
Shripriya ma'am, I'm afraid you are on mute.
Well, Abhilash, there is a question in the chat box. You can, shall I say it? Is Sripriya having problems?
Yes. Richu, go ahead.
Yeah, but indeed, that was a wonderful speech on the postmodern condition with Lotard and Baudelaire and Husserl. And I really enjoyed the extra point part of making it new.
Thank you so much, Richu.
And connecting the modernism and postmodernism. But so let's go to the questions, and the platform is open for discussion. You can come on video and you can ask questions, or you can just type your questions in the chat box. We are also monitoring the YouTube channel. Yes, Ripriya ma'am. Can you come?
Hello, Abhilash sir. Good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
As your topic suggests, a wonderful talk. I just want to know your point of view on one thing. Like as your title says, angst and pangs of postmodernism. My point is that can we consider this thing that the theory of postmodernism, the theoretical proposition that this particular concept has, I feel that it is the essence itself. Like philosophically speaking, that this is how human beings, or human civilization kind of function, in a way that there will be difficulties or there will be gaps in life per se. If I speak in terms of philosophy, there will be difficulties and crises and gaps in life, or for that matter, in any specific area. If I talk about, so don't you think that categorizing it within this sphere of postmodernism is basically to create a hierarchy in itself? We can understand it as human conditioning also, right?
Yes, ma'am. If we look at from one side, we can say it to be human conditioning, but that we are also living in a world that is not stable in terms of not having something concrete and specific. Like I earlier said, there are attempts which are made in order to understand this diversity in order to understand this plurality. Because postmodernism, at the end of the day, will always celebrate something that is plural. We don't have something concrete. The meta-narratives are gone. The meta-narratives are no longer viable. They are no longer vibrant and are present. But then we are also living in a society that is having numerous technological advancements, that is having numerous ideas which are coming up every single day. And in order to embrace that, we will also have to consider the fact that there are divisions, there are categorical divisions, and this division will both obliterate the difference and also celebrate the presence of pluralism. So more than hierarchy, what we have is the embracement of differences in terms of not having anything concrete. We can put it like this, that something concrete was epitomized by the moderns, something which is plural, something which is different, which is small in terms of history, is the main focus, is the main epitomized idea of the postmoderns. This is how we can put it, ma'am.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Sir, but if we have hierarchies, then how can we embrace differences? Because basically, it is because of hierarchies that differences are not given that much of importance. They are silenced. So, what is your take on that?
Very true. Yeah. If we are to talk about hierarchy, we will again have to go back to our own idea of understanding the economic system. But do we really understand that? That's my question. We don't understand that, right? Because understanding an economic system will make us realize the fact that the present day, like Frederick Zemison has argued, that the present day society has moved away from the entire economics of it. And the period which we live in now is the third stage of the last stage of capitalism, of late capitalism. So what we have is the creation of differences in terms of the rich and the poor, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. But then we are not realizing the fact that there is a great divide which is getting created. And the main reason, the primary concern in this relation is that we are away from the economics of it. We are away from the entire system of it. We very well know that we are a part of the economic system, but then it is only the superficial level. We have studied the aspects only at a superficial level. And this study of our superficial idea is again Marxist. So what we have is only the differences with the help of our ideas. This is how things can be.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Abhilash Sripriya ma'am is having a problem with unmuting, so can I just read out the questions in the comment box?
Absolutely, Richu, go ahead. No worries.
So the first question is by Dr. Mridusmita Mahanda. I'm sorry. Can we consider myths as meta-narrative for identity construction from postmodern perspective?
Well, I believe that we can consider myth to be some kind of help in our relation to identity construction, but then myths are again subject to our own interpretation, right? The present day world, there is a very famous aspect of revisiting our myth. There are many mythological paper writings, there are many mythological conferences which are going on in the present day world, which will make us sustain the fact that myths are getting reworked on. And the idea of postmodern revisitorism is really important in understanding myth, because we are revisiting the idea. So revisionism is an important ideological concept which will make us understand the fact that myths are again helpful in the understanding of our own position. Because at the end of the day, it is about position. It is about a human self that will sustain, that will help us know, that will also help us realize that there is some kind of idea, there is some kind of experiences which we need to take into account. And myth can be of some aid, but then if we are to rely on myth, we'll again have to consider its authenticity, because the more we go back to myth, the higher the chances of them getting replicated in the wrong form, in the form which is not that authentic. Because there are many works which have already been rewritten, and in relation to myth. Let us take the example of Draupadi by this one, Mahashweta Devi, the short story, the famous short story. That is again a mythological reworking. We can again go back to Chitra Banerjee Divakarani's work. How works are pertaining to the entire aspect of mythological understanding, Forest of Enchantment for that matter, Palace of Illusions for that matter. We can have the entire library in front of us in relation to myths. So yeah, we can be sure of the fact that myth can be of some aid, but then to have it in a full-fledged manner, it is a work in progress is what I believe.
Thank you, Abhilash sir, for the matter. Dr. Mridusmita, are you satisfied with the answer? Would you like to unmute yourself and post any further clarifications?
Oh, yes. Thanks a lot, sir. Actually, I'm working on myth. Tomorrow is my paper in the evening session. So just I want to validate it on my point. That
Best of luck, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm working on the myth of Brahmaputra.
Oh, that's nice.
From a very postmodern perspective. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And now we are going to the question that we sourced from YouTube. It is from Niranjan sir, from a speaker of day 3. So I'll go to the question. Niranjan sir has asked, Abhilash ji, can you throw some light on the contrast in the ideological position or fragmentation between the modernist and the postmodernist?
Nilanjan sir, first of all, thank you very much for that question. Feels really great. Well, what I believe is that if we consider fragmentation, we are to consider the presence of organic unity. We are to consider the presence of wholeness, which we find in the earlier works. I gave the example of Ulysses in my talk. It is the epitome of something that is whole, that is concrete. But then if we read works like The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, if we read works like A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro again, we will find that the plots are absolutely non-linear. The plots are absolutely fragmented in the sense we don't have something precise. You cannot be sure of the readings. You cannot be sure of what is going to happen. There is a very famous novel called An Artist of the Floating World. That novel is postmodern to the core in terms of fragmentation, in terms of not having something linear. There can be chapter 31 instead of chapter 1 to begin with. There can be a narrator which will tell you a line that will make you think and think and think, but then you will never be able to come out with a solution. This is how things happen. But in relation to the modern period, let us take the example of Wasteland, which I took during my lecture. Wasteland epitomizes spiritual unity. Wasteland epitomizes religious unity for that matter, human unity to some extent. But then it was whole in terms of its structure. Ulysses, it was whole in terms of its structure. Let us take the novels by Virginia Woolf. Let us take Mrs. Dalloway. Let us take To the Lighthouse. All those novels, if you properly analyze, we will find the presence of something concrete. You can sense them. You can have something in front of you. You can properly understand them. But then in relation to the postmodern writings, do we really have something concrete? Do we really have something precise in front of us? Like Richu showed the earlier pictures of Kurt Vonnegut's novel. Kurt Vonnegut is an absolute genius in terms of writing the postmodern ideas. Catch 22, Helen Keller. All those texts will make us realize the fact that we don't have a kind of unity which is organic, which is structured, because the ideas are missing, the plot is not coherent, the structures are not linear in terms of ideas, and also we as readers will never be able to find out something specific in terms of meaning.
Wow, that was a pretty spot on answer for Niranjan sir's question. I think he will be satisfied over YouTube, or otherwise he can ask him straight face to face during his session.
I'll be having a talk with him.
We will go on to the next question. We are going to Bindu Sri ma'am's question. I'll talk it out. I am so ecstatic ecstatic with your presentation, sir. I got my question solved about the current period, that it is metamodernism. I have a question: how to differentiate metamodernism with postmodernism? Could you please brief it?
Yes, sure. What does the word meta sort of make us understand? In between, right? Postmodernism. Yeah, it is beyond. It is beyond. But then there are certain ideas in relation to getting embedded within. So we have an in-between scenario. We also have something beyond the entire phase. If we are to specifically demarcate metamodernism and postmodernism, we can say that metamodernism sort of epitomizes itself in its present in the late 20th century in terms of its ideas. And postmodernism can be understood to be the beginning point during the civil rights movement in the 1950s, which was the period just after the World War, just after the devastations of the World War. Like I said, there was the emergence of the hippie culture, the Beat generation, 1960s. So specifically, precisely bringing in something, we can differentiate them with the help of characteristics as well, because postmodernism will give you different characteristics. Metamodernism will again make you understand that it is an oscillation. What is metamodernism? It is an oscillation between the irony of postmodernism and the celebration of modernism as well.
Bindusri ma'am, would you like to clarify that doubt further? Has Abhilash
Yes, definitely. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, I have a do you prescribe any books that relate to modernism, sir? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
For metamodernism, I think the Routledge Companion to Understanding Postmodernism contains a very famous essay. That book is really helpful, and there are certain interviews available on YouTube. I was watching an interview conducted by Cynthia Wang and Brian Soffer on the other day in relation to how postmodern scenario has sort of changed itself. And in that particular interview, you will find a lot of ideas in relation to metamodernism, how it has immersed itself to be something different. There is also a very famous book by, I forgot the name. It is by George Lewis. Yeah, it is by George Lewis and Sebastian George. It is called The Introduction to Metamodern World. And that book will also give you some kind of understanding as to how metamodernism has evolved over time. I hope this will help, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Most welcome, ma'am.
Bindusri ma'am, will that do for your follow-up doubt on examples if possible with?
Yes, ma'am. That I have just now solved with, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the amazing question, Bindusri ma'am. And now, participants, I repeat, the question is, the platform is open for discussion. You can come on video, you can ask it live, because I think we will be live here. If you want to ask, we have more questions. Abhilash is more than eager to answer all your questions. So I will go to the next question, Abhilash. Diana Wills wants to know, so may I know your views on feminist phenomenology and what is the significance of experiences in phenomenological studies?
If I am not wrong, feminist phenomenology will sort of understand the entire structure in relation to sexual differences. And then it will also try to make us realize the intersubjective positions, between man and women. And then it's the name of a book, if I'm not wrong, Feminist Phenomenology. It's the name of a book. There is also a book having the same name. But if we are to consider the main ideas in relation to its intricacies, in relation to its fragments, in relation to its ramifications, what we can say is that there are positions which will try to, the world is not an abstract, which will try to make us realize that the world, that the being in a world is something that is not abstract, but rather having a concretized position. So it will sort of epitomize the sexual differences which we have in relation to man and women in general. And what is the significance of experiences in phenomenological studies? Yeah, experiences play vital roles in our own understanding of phenomenological studies. The reason being that whenever we talk about an experience, we will also talk about our own understanding of the self. And that self, that understanding in relation to the self, will help us realize how an individual is getting positioned, how an individual is getting structured. Because at the end of the day, it is the self, it is our own identity, it is our own concern in terms of establishing, in terms of positioning our own individuality that is important. That is what is making us run. That is what is making us driven. Fine.
Diana Wills, ma'am, if you are here.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I'm very satisfied and you answered my question. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, ma'am.
Abhilash sir, we'll go to the next question. It is by Annie Saifi. Sir, please give a brief idea about what is the difference between feminism and post-feminism.
Post-feminism. Okay, I was reading an article the other day in relation to post-feminism, and I found that post-feminism is dead. Post-feminism is something that will make us realize that the debates, the countercultures, the counter-arguments in relation to feminism are no longer viable, because the present-day world is a world of equality. And the ideas in relation to feminism, in relation to post-feminism, sort of transpired into some kind of myth, you know. There is a professor, if I'm not wrong, Professor Sayan Dey, and the professor makes us understand, makes us realize the fact that post-feminism is just the main ideas which took the world by storm in relation to the emergence of feminism. It's just the continuation, nothing else. And the post-feminist ideas and the post-feminist ideological divisions will again makes us realize that the ideas are getting continued. Although we talk about equality, although we talk about the male and the female being equal, we'll again and again go back to the main ideas that there are differences, that there are processes which are getting obliterated in relation to understanding the differences. But then at this very point, we have certain